I stood on a beach in Hawaii watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold when my phone exploded with messages. He's gone. The wedding is off. Where are you? 2 days earlier, my sister had banned me from her wedding. Her reason, her fiancé supposedly had feelings for me. After 36 years of being the invisible daughter, the one who sacrificed everything, while she got everything, I'd finally had enough. So I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I smiled, booked a 5-star resort, and disappeared. Now her groom had vanished right before the ceremony, and my family was begging me to come home and fix the mess. The same people who treated me like a threat were suddenly calling me their saviour. But they had no idea what I discovered while sipping cocktails on that beach. My mother had been playing a game far more twisted than I'd ever imagined, one that started with my grandmother's will and ended with a lie that had stolen my entire life, and I was about to take it all back. They wanted my help. Fine, but first they were going to tell me the truth. My name is Nicole Barnes. I'm 36 years old, a marketing professional who's built a modest but stable career in a field where I'm valued for my reliability and quiet competence. I live alone in a small apartment across town from my parents, and for most of my life I've existed in the carefully maintained shadow of my older sister Lauren, the golden child who could do no wrong. I learned my place in the Barnes family hierarchy early. I was 12 years old, standing in my grandmother's backyard during a summer reunion, wearing a dress my mother had picked out because it was practical. Lauren, 14 and already stunning, wore something pastel and flowing that made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. I remember clutching a glass of lemonade, trying to be invisible the way I'd learnt to be, when my mother's voice cut through the afternoon chatter. She was talking to Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim, gesturing toward Lauren with unmistakable pride. "Lauren's meant for great things, Ishai," she said, her voice carrying that particular warmth she reserved only for my sister. Then her gaze drifted to me, and the warmth cooled to something more practical, more resigned. "Nicole's simple, but she's dependable." Simple. Dependable. 2 words that would define my entire existence from that moment forward. I learned not to expect praise for my achievements because they were simply what was expected of someone dependable. When I graduated summa cum laude from college, my mother said, "That's nice, dear," and immediately pivoted to discussing Lauren's latest drama with a boyfriend. When I got promoted at work, the family dinner conversation centered on Lauren's new apartment that she couldn't quite afford but insisted she deserved. And when I stayed by my grandmother's bedside for 3 years while she slowly succumbed to illness, visiting every single day after work to feed her bathe, her read to her the family praised Lauren for managing to visit twice. The pattern never changed. It only became more entrenched. Even now, at 36, I find myself responding to my mother's calls for "a little help, dear," which inevitably means a wire transfer to cover Lauren's credit card bill or car payment or whatever financial crisis she's manufactured this month. My father never intervenes. Robert Barnes perfected the art of silent complicity decades ago, deferring every decision, every conflict, every uncomfortable truth to my mother's management. I've become fluent in the unspoken language of my family. I am the safety net, never the celebration. So when Lauren's wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, sliding through my mail slot, with its heavy cream cardstock and elaborate calligraphy, I wasn't surprised to receive it. I was in fact already planning what I'd wear, calculating what gift would be appropriate, arranging my work schedule to take time off. I stood in my small kitchen, afternoon light streaming through the window, and carefully opened the envelope with a knife. The invitation itself was exactly what I'd expected: elegant, expensive, utterly Lauren. The venue was one of those sprawling garden estates that cost more for a single day than I made in 3 months. I was reading through the details, making mental notes, when I noticed the handwritten addition at the bottom. Lauren's distinctive cursive, the kind our mother had paid for years of lessons to perfect, spelled out a message that seemed to stop time itself. My hands began to tremble. The invitation fluttered slightly as I read the words again, certain I must have misunderstood. At the bottom of the invitation, written in her perfect cursive, were words that made my hands tremble: Please understand, it's better if you don't come. I stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only minutes, staring at those words until they blurred. My first instinct was disbelief. Surely this was some kind of mistake, some miscommunication that could be cleared up with a simple phone call. Lauren could be thoughtless, yes, but deliberately cruel. That seemed like something else entirely. My hands were still shaking as I picked up my phone and scrolled to her number. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and busy. "Oh, Nicole, hi. I'm actually in the middle of a fitting. Can this be quick?" "I got your invitation," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need you to explain the note." There was a pause, and I could hear muffled voices in the background, someone saying something about hemlines. Then Lauren's voice came back lower, now more private. The brightness had been replaced by something harder, more practiced. "Look, I didn't want to do it this way, but I didn't know how else to handle it." "Handle what exactly?" "Mark told me he had feelings for you." She said it quickly, as if speed would make it less painful. "He said it was a long time ago before we got together, but I can't have that hanging over my wedding day. You understand, right? It's just easier if you're not there." I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. "Mark, I barely know Mark. I've met him maybe 3 times at family dinners. We've never even had a real conversation." "Well, apparently, you made an impression." Her tone had turned almost accusatory, as if I deliberately seduced her fiancé through the sheer power of passing the potatoes. "I can't risk any weird energy on the most important day of my life. You've always been the understanding one, Nicole. I need you to understand this." The understanding one. There it was, again, that label I'd worn, like a uniform my entire life. The understanding one doesn't complain when her birthday is forgotten. The understanding one doesn't object when her achievements are minimized. And now the understanding one is expected to quietly accept being banned from her own sister's wedding, based on some supposed confession from a man she barely knew existed. This is insane, Lauren. You know that, right? "I have to go. The seamstress is waiting. We'll talk later." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen phone, still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence where my sister's voice had been. My second instinct was to call my mother. Surely she would intervene, would see how absurd this was, would advocate for me the way mothers are supposed to advocate for their children. I should have known better. "Mum, did you know about this?" I asked as soon as she answered. "Did you know Lauren was uninviting me?" "Oh, Nicole." My mother's sigh carried the weight of infinite patience tested by unreasonable demands. "Lauren mentioned she might need to make some difficult decisions about the guest list. These things are very expensive, you know, and tensions run high. She didn't uninvite me because of budget, Mum. She said Mark has feelings for me. It's not even true. I don't understand why—" "Lauren's been planning this wedding for years, Nicole. Years. Do you have any idea how much pressure she's under? How many details she's managing? The last thing she needs is drama." "I'm not creating drama. I didn't do anything." "I know you didn't, sweetheart." Her voice softened slightly, the way it did when she was about to ask me to be reasonable. "But you've always been the understanding one. You're strong. You can handle this. Lauren is more sensitive. This day means everything to her. Can't you just be understanding? For her, for the family. The understanding one. The strong one. The one who could handle being excluded from her own sister's wedding because asking for basic dignity would be creating drama. Mum, I have to run, dear. Your father and I are meeting the caterer. We'll talk soon." She hung up before I could finish my sentence. I tried my father next, though I already knew what I'd hear. Robert Barnes had never intervened in a conflict in his life. He answered on the first ring, his voice cautious as if he already knew why I was calling. "Dad, did you know about Lauren's note?" A long, deep sigh. "Your mother mentioned something about it." And another pause. "Maybe it's for the best, sweetheart. Let's not make waves. These things have a way of working themselves out if we just stay calm. I am calm, Dad. I'm just trying to understand why my entire family thinks it's acceptable to ban me from a wedding based on something that isn't even true. Nicole, honey, you know how your sister gets. And your mother has put so much energy into this event. Maybe just let it go for the sake of peace. Peace. As if peace had ever required anything from anyone except me. Fine, I said. Just that one word. Nothing else. I hung up without waiting for his response. I sat on my couch in my small, quiet apartment, still holding the invitation in one hand and my phone in the other. The afternoon light had faded to evening grey. In the span of 3 phone calls, I'd learned exactly where I stood in my family's hierarchy. I was the shock absorber, the one who took the impact so others could remain comfortable. I was useful when they needed money or help or someone to clean up their messes, but I wasn't worth defending. I wasn't worth believing. I wasn't worth a seat at my own sister's wedding. For 36 years, I'd been the understanding one. I'd swallowed every slight, minimised, every hurt, convinced myself that being dependable was its own form of love. But sitting there in the gathering darkness, I understood something new. That night, I realised silence could hurt more than any words, and I was done being the only one who got hurt. Over the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about that phrase my mother had used on the phone. You've always been the understanding one. As if being understanding was my defining characteristic, my primary function in the family ecosystem. I found myself replaying moments from my childhood, adolescence, and adulthood with a new lens, seeing patterns I'd trained myself not to notice. My mother, Margaret Barnes, had built her entire identity around the image of the perfect family. I realised sitting in my apartment night after night with a glass of wine I barely touched, that I couldn't remember a single family decision that had been made based on what anyone actually wanted or needed. Every choice ran through the filter of a single question: what will people think? When I was 15 and wanted to try out for the soccer team, my mother had vetoed it immediately. Not because I wouldn't be good at it, but because athletic girls can seem so aggressive, and that's not the image we want for you. When I'd gotten accepted to a prestigious university 3 hours away, she'd suggested the local college instead because people might think we're not close as a family if you go so far. Even my career in marketing had been subtly steered by her commentary about how stable it was, how respectable, how it wouldn't draw the wrong kind of attention. Lauren, meanwhile, was allowed to be dramatic, to pursue theatre, to make grand gestures and have public meltdowns because somehow that fit the narrative my mother had written for her. Lauren was the star, and stars were allowed to be temperamental. I was the supporting cast, and supporting cast were supposed to be grateful for their small roles. The Christmas photos came back to me with particular vividness. I was 17, Lauren was 19, and we were posing in front of the tree in matching red dresses my mother had bought. I remembered the photographer, a friend of my mother's, setting up the shot. "Let's have Lauren in the centre," she'd said, and my mother had agreed immediately. "Nicole, sweetheart, could you step just a bit to the left?" "Yes, just behind Lauren's shoulder. Perfect." I'd looked at those photos later and noticed I was half cropped out of most of them. My face partially obscured by the angle my body relegated to the edge of the frame, where the eye wouldn't naturally land. When I'd pointed this out gently, my mother had said, "Oh, but Lauren looks so beautiful centered like that, and you can still see you're there, dear. That's what matters." That's what matters. Being visible enough to prove I existed, but not so visible as to draw focus from the real subject. My 16th birthday should have been a milestone, the kind of event a teenage girl remembers forever. I'd invited a dozen friends over, and my mother had hired a caterer, rented tables for the backyard. I remember feeling for once like I was the centre of something. Then 2 hours into the party, my mother had emerged from the house with a cake, and everyone had started singing, and I'd been confused because we'd already done the birthday cake. "Surprise?" My mother had announced, beaming, "We're also celebrating Lauren's acceptance into the Regional Theatre's production of Oklahoma. She found out this morning," and I thought, Why not celebrate both my girls at once? The rest of the party had devolved into discussions of Lauren's role, her costume, her rehearsal schedule. My friends had drifted away early, and I'd spent the last hour of my own birthday party cleaning up while listening to relatives congratulate my sister. When I tried to talk to my mother about it later, she'd looked genuinely confused. But wasn't it wonderful to have something to celebrate together? I thought you'd be happy for your sister. You're always so understanding about these things. Understanding. That word again wielded like a tool to shape my behaviour, to preempt my objections, to ensure I stayed in my assigned role. Even my college graduation, the culmination of 4 years of hard work that had earned me summa cum laude honours, had been overshadowed. Lauren had broken up with her boyfriend the day before, and the entire family had spent the graduation dinner discussing her heartbreak, offering comfort, analysing what had gone wrong. When my father had tried to toast my achievement, my mother had cut him off. Let's not make Lauren feel worse by rubbing happiness in her face, Robert. Nicole understands. Don't you, sweetheart? I'd nodded, understanding nothing except that my understanding was apparently infinite and endlessly required. But there was one person who had seen through it all. Mrs. Edith had lived next door to me for the 3 years I'd been in this apartment, and in that time she'd become something like the grandmother I'd lost. She was sharp-minded and direct in the way only people in their 80s can be uninterested in pretense or social niceties that obscured truth. 6 months before she died, we'd been having tea in her small kitchen, when she'd set down her cup and looked at me with unusual intensity. Nicole, dear, I'm going to say something and I need you to really hear me. I'd nodded attentive. People like your sister never realise how fragile kindness is until it's gone. And people like your mother never realise they're breaking one daughter while trying to build up another. You've been breaking for a long time, haven't you? I'd deflected, made some joke about being the sturdy one, but she'd gripped my hand with surprising strength. Sturdy isn't the same as unbreakable, and being the good daughter shouldn't cost you yourself. At the time, I'd smiled and changed the subject, uncomfortable with the intensity of her perception. Now, sitting alone in my apartment with that wedding invitation still on my coffee table, I understood what she'd been trying to tell me. I'd spent 36 years being good, being understanding, being sturdy, and what had it bought me? The privilege of being uninvited from my own sister's wedding. The honour of being told I was too threatening to be allowed in family photos of the event. I thought about something else too, a memory that surfaced like debris from a shipwreck. I'd been maybe 14, passing by my mother's bedroom when I'd heard her on the phone with someone. Her voice had carried that particular edge it got when she was discussing old wounds. My sister got everything when we were young. The house, the attention, all of it. I got scraps, hand-me-downs, and lectures about being grateful. I swore when I had children I'd never let that happen to my girls. At the time, I thought she meant she'd treat Lauren and me equally, that she learned from her own pain. Now I wondered if I'd misunderstood entirely. Maybe she hadn't sworn to prevent favoritism. Maybe she'd just sworn to control who got favoured. For the first time, I wondered if being the good one had cost me everything, including the right to be seen as fully human. The question that haunted me in those days following my revelation wasn't whether my family had mistreated me. That truth had become undeniable. The real question was, what was I going to do about it? My first instinct, deeply ingrained from decades of conditioning, was to write a letter. A careful, measured explanation of why I was hurt, why their treatment was unfair, why I deserved basic consideration and respect. I actually drafted it sitting at my kitchen table, with my laptop open, trying to find words that would make them understand without making them defensive, that would express pain without being accused of creating drama. I got 3 paragraphs in before I stopped reading back what I'd written. It was the letter of someone still seeking permission to feel hurt, someone still trying to convince her family that she mattered, someone still playing by rules that had never been designed to protect her. I deleted it, Instead, I made a different choice. If they wanted me to be understanding, I would show them what my understanding had created over the years. I would give them a gift that represented everything I'd poured into this family time, care, love, artistry, and let them do with it what they would. I'd taken up painting 3 years ago, something I did on weekends when the apartment felt too quiet and the walls too close. I wasn't particularly skilled, but I was patient, and patience could compensate for a lot. I'd been working on a particular piece for nearly a month, something I'd originally intended as a Christmas gift for my mother, but had never quite finished. It was a painting of 2 little girls in a garden, rendered from an old photograph I'd found in a box of family pictures. Lauren and me, maybe 7 and 5 years old, standing in our grandmother's garden holding hands. In the photo, we were laughing at something off camera, our faces open and trusting before the hierarchy had been fully established, before we'd learned our designated roles. I spent the next 3 evenings finishing it, adding details I'd previously left rough: the texture of the roses climbing the trellis behind us, the dappled sunlight through the apple tree, the specific shade of Lauren's sundress. When it was done, I looked at it and saw something both beautiful and heartbreaking, a moment of sisterhood that had existed before it was poisoned by favoritism. I had it professionally framed, packed it carefully in bubble wrap and a sturdy box, and included a card. I kept the message simple, refusing the urge to be either bitter or pleading. To my sister, may you find what you're looking for. I shipped it priority mail, signature required 3 days before the wedding. For 2 days, I heard nothing. I hadn't expected thanks exactly, but some acknowledgement seemed reasonable. On the 3rd day, 4 days before the wedding, my phone chimed with a text from Karen, my closest friend from college, and one of the few people in my life who'd witnessed my family dynamics with clear eyes. The message said only, "I'm so sorry." Below it was a screenshot that took me several seconds to process. It was a Facebook Marketplace listing. The photo showed my painting still in its professional frame, propped against what looked like a garage wall. The listing read, "Unwanted wedding gift never opened. 50 Ds, buyer picks up." I stared at the screen, waiting for the emotional impact to hit. I expected rage or tears, or at least the hot flush of humiliation. Instead, I felt something stranger and more unsettling. Nothing. Or not quite nothing. A sort of hollow numbness, as if the part of me that had been capable of being hurt by my family had simply switched off, like a circuit breaker responding to overload. $50. 3 weeks of careful work hours, of choosing colours and mixing paints, the cost of professional framing. $50, and they hadn't even opened it. I called Karen. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anger on my behalf. "Nicole, I saw it this morning, and I can't believe..." "It's okay," I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. "Actually, it's perfect." Perfect. How is this perfect? Because now I know exactly where I stand. No more wondering if I'm being too sensitive or misinterpreting things. They've made it crystal clear. There was a pause. "So, what are you going to do?" I pulled my laptop toward me and opened a new browser tab. "I'm going on vacation." Over the next hour, with Karen still on the phone offering commentary and occasional applause, I booked a trip I would never have allowed myself under normal circumstances. A flight to Hawaii, leaving on Saturday morning, the morning of Lauren's wedding. A 5-star resort with an ocean view room. A full spa package. Dinners at restaurants I'd only read about in travel magazines. The total came to $3,200 more than I'd ever spent on myself at once. My finger hovered over the confirm booking button for only a moment. "Do it," Karen said from the phone speaker. I clicked. A confirmation email appeared immediately, with flight details and hotel information, and a cheerful, "We can't wait to welcome you to paradise." "How do you feel?" Karen asked. "Free," I said, and realised it was true. For the first time in my life, I'd made a choice that served no one's needs but my own. I hadn't asked permission. I hadn't worried about what people would think. I'd simply decided what I wanted and claimed it. Later that evening, Karen came over with wine and takeout, and we sat on my small balcony watching the sun set over the city. She looked at me with a mixture of concern and something that might have been admiration. "You know what I think?" she said. "Maybe peace is your best revenge. Maybe just being happy, being free, maybe that's the most powerful thing you can do." I smiled at her, the first genuine smile I'd managed in days. Maybe you're right. But as I sipped my wine and felt the evening breeze on my face, I heard a small voice in my head, clear and certain. Maybe. But maybe I want both peace and justice. That night, I set an alarm for Saturday morning and laid out my most comfortable travel clothes. I printed my boarding pass. I packed a suitcase full of sundresses and swimsuits and books I'd been meaning to read. I moved through these preparations with calm efficiency, and when I finally climbed into bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. When I hit confirm booking, it felt like closing a chapter I'd been stuck in for years, and I didn't look back. Not yet, anyway. I woke to sunlight filtering through white gauze curtains that moved gently in the ocean breeze. For a disoriented moment, I couldn't remember where I was, and then it came back in a rush of relief, and something that felt dangerously close to joy. Hawaii. I was in Hawaii. And, back home, my sister was getting married without me. I'd expected to feel guilt, or at least anxiety, but instead I felt only a profound sense of lightness. The knot that had taken up permanent residence in my chest for as long as I could remember had loosened during the flight, and now, waking in this beautiful room, with the sound of waves providing a gentle soundtrack, it seemed to dissolve entirely. I took my time getting ready, something I never did. I made coffee in the small machine provided by the hotel, took it out onto my private balcony, and watched the ocean for 20 minutes without looking at my phone. The water was impossibly blue, the kind of blue that didn't seem quite real, and the sun was already warm on my skin despite the early hour. After breakfast at the hotel restaurant, I walked barefoot on the beach, feeling the sand shift beneath my feet and the water rush over my ankles in cool pulses. I'd brought a novel I'd been trying to read for 6 months, one of those thick literary books that required actual attention, and I settled into a lounge chair under a palm tree and read 3 entire chapters without interruption. No phone calls asking for favours, no texts requiring immediate responses, no family obligations pulling me away from my own thoughts. It was, I realised somewhere around chapter 4, the most peaceful I'd felt in years. Around noon, I allowed myself to check my phone more out of habit than genuine curiosity. I had deliberately not asked anyone about wedding updates, had not sought out information about how the ceremony had gone. But Instagram, as it always did, brought the information to me unbidden. The posts were already flooding my feed. Lauren, in her wedding gown, a creation of lace and silk that probably cost more than my car standing in front of an elaborately decorated arch dripping with white roses and hydrangeas. The venue was exactly what I'd expected. A sprawling garden estate that spoke of money and taste in equal measure. There were photos of the wedding party, of the reception tables, with their crystal and candle lights, of my mother looking elegant and proud in her mother of the bride dress. But as I scrolled through the images, I noticed something that probably no one else would see. In every photo of Lauren, her smile was bright and perfect, but it stopped at her mouth. Her eyes held a brittleness, a tension that the professional photography couldn't quite soften. Her shoulders were rigid beneath the delicate lace of her gown. She looked like someone performing the role of happy bride rather than actually being one. I felt a complicated stir of emotion looking at those photos. Not quite pity, not quite satisfaction, something uncomfortably in between. I closed the app and set my phone face down on the small table beside my chair. I had lunch at a beachside restaurant, ordered fish so fresh. It had probably been swimming that morning, and treated myself to a glass of wine despite it being only 1 p.m. I was on vacation. I was allowed. It was around 2:00 Hawaii time, 7 p.m. back home, when the reception would be in full swing, that my phone started buzzing with the insistence of an emergency. I ignored it, at first committed to maintaining my peaceful bubble, but the buzzing continued, and continued, and continued. Finally, with a sigh that held more resignation than curiosity, I picked up the phone. 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, all from different family members, all sent within the last 30 minutes. I opened the texts, my heart rate still surprisingly calm. From my cousin Jennifer, "Where are you? Something's happened." From Aunt Carol, "He's gone." Mark disappeared. From my mother, "Call me immediately. This is an emergency." From Uncle Jim, "Wedding is cancelled. Lauren locked herself in the bridal suite. This is a disaster." I read through them all twice, my brain processing the information with strange detachment. Mark was gone. The wedding was cancelled. Lauren was presumably devastated. And my family, in their panic, had turned to me. I set the phone down and looked out at the ocean, watching the waves roll in with their eternal indifferent rhythm. Part of me wanted to feel vindication, some sense of cosmic justice being served. Another part wanted to feel sympathy, to leap into problem-solving mode the way I'd been trained to do my entire life. But mostly, I felt quiet, still, unmoved. I silenced my phone completely and walked back down to the beach. I ordered an expensive cocktail from the beach bar, something tropical with too much fruit and a tiny umbrella that would have made me feel foolish under normal circumstances. I sipped it slowly, tasting pineapple and rum and something else I couldn't identify. As the afternoon stretched into evening, my phone continued to vibrate in my beach bag, a persistent reminder of chaos I'd chosen to leave behind. I didn't look at it. Instead, I watched families building sandcastles, couples walking hand in hand along the water's edge, children shrieking with delight as they chased the waves. I watched the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and pink that seemed too vivid to be natural. The water reflected the colours back, creating a double sunset that took my breath away. Other people on the beach stopped what they were doing to watch, pulled into a moment of collective awe. For 3 hours, I existed in a bubble of peace that felt revolutionary, precisely because it was so simple. I wasn't fixing anything. I wasn't managing anyone's emotions. I wasn't being understanding or dependable or any of the things I'd been told I had to be. I was just a woman on a beach watching a sunset, holding a cocktail, breathing air that didn't taste like obligation. This, I thought, is what it feels like to choose myself. This is what I've been missing. As the sun touched the horizon, I felt something shift in my chest, some understanding that I was crossing a threshold I couldn't uncross. I'd stepped out of the role I'd played for 36 years, and I couldn't step back into it, not fully, not ever again. And then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, and I thought the drama was over, my phone rang. It was Mark. I stared at Mark's name on my screen for 3 rings before answering, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Mark, the man I'd supposedly made such an impression on that Lauren had banned me from her own wedding. The man I'd met perhaps 3 times, at family dinners with whom I'd exchanged maybe a dozen sentences total about weather and traffic, and other safe topics designed to fill silence. The man who had just left my sister at the altar. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hello." "Nicole?" His voice was rough raw in a way that suggested he'd been crying or shouting or both. "Thank God, I wasn't sure you'd pick up." "I'm not sure why you're calling me Mark." I kept my voice neutral, still unsure what role I was supposed to play in whatever drama was unfolding 3,000 miles away. "Because I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you a lot more than that, but an apology is where I need to start." He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "I'm so sorry, Nicole. For everything. I should never have agreed to marry her." I sat down on a bench facing the darkening ocean, processing this. "Mark, I don't understand what this has to do with me. Lauren's your fiancé. Was your fiancé. Whatever happened between you two. It has everything to do with you." He cut me off, and there was an urgency in his voice that made me listen. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. This whole thing, from the beginning, it was never really about me and Lauren. It was about your family. about your mother. A chill ran through me despite the warm evening air. What are you talking about? I need to explain something first about how I even have your number. He gave a short, bitter laugh. You're probably wondering that, right? We barely know each other. I had been wondering, actually. The thought crossed my mind. Thanksgiving, 2 years ago, your mother added us all to a family group chat for coordinating who was bringing what dishes. You were in it. I saved your number then because... He stopped abruptly. Because why? Because I liked you. He said it simply without flourish. From the first time I met you at that charity dinner your family hosted, you were the only person there who seemed genuinely interested in what anyone else had to say. You asked me about my work, actually listened to the answer, asked follow-up questions that showed you were really paying attention. Everyone else was performing, but you were just real. I remembered that dinner vaguely. It had been one of my mother's elaborate affairs designed to showcase the Barnes family to local society. I'd been seated next to Mark by accident, a last-minute shuffle when someone had cancelled. We talked about his work in environmental engineering, and I remembered being genuinely interested, but I'd thought nothing of it beyond polite dinner conversation. Mark, I don't... Let me finish. Please. His voice cracked slightly. A week after that dinner, your mother called me. Said she wanted to thank me for coming, and could she take me to lunch to discuss some potential business connections. I thought it was a professional thing, so I agreed. I felt my stomach tighten with the beginning of understanding. At that lunch, she asked me about my conversation with you, said she'd noticed we seemed to connect. I admitted stupidly that I'd enjoyed talking to you and thought you seemed like a remarkable person. That's when she told me you were engaged. I was never engaged, I said quietly. I know that now. His voice held a mixture of anger and shame. But then she seemed so casual about it, so matter-of-fact. She even showed me a photo on her phone. You with some guy at a restaurant, both of you laughing. She said his name was David, that you'd been together for 2 years, but keeping it quiet until he finished his residency. I closed my eyes, trying to remember any photo that could have been twisted to fit that narrative. There had been a work dinner about 3 years ago where I'd sat next to a colleague named David, a perfectly pleasant gay man who'd made me laugh with stories about his disastrous online dating experiences. Someone had taken a photo of the table. That must have been it. She manipulated you. I said the words tasting bitter. She did more than that. Over the next few months, she kept arranging situations where I'd run into Lauren. Always casual, always seeming like coincidence. Your sister is beautiful, charming in her way. And your mother kept saying things like, Lauren needs someone stable and you'd be so good for her. And Lauren could use someone who sees her for who she really is. I felt like I was being guided, but I couldn't quite see the hand doing the guiding. So you dated Lauren? I did, and I told myself I was doing something good helping someone who needed stability. But if I'm being honest, part of me was also thinking that if I couldn't be with you, at least I could be part of your family in some way. Which sounds pathetic, now that I'm saying it out loud. It did sound pathetic, but I also understood it in a strange way. People do irrational things when they're being manipulated by someone skilled in the art. Why did you leave today? I asked. What changed? Last night I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs around 2 a.m. for water. Your mother was in your father's study on the phone. She didn't hear me come down the stairs. He paused and I heard him swallow hard. She said, Nicole will never know what she lost. It's better this way. I managed the situation years ago and secured the outcome. So the words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I stood there in the dark hallway, Mark continued, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The engagement story, the convenient meetings with Lauren, the wedding invitation you weren't supposed to receive. Your mother mentioned you had kindly declined, but I'd heard Lauren on the phone telling someone she'd uninvited you. Everything was a lie. Everything was manipulation. and I realized I was about to marry someone I didn't love because your mother had orchestrated the entire thing for reasons I didn't even understand. So you left. I left. I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't build a life on a foundation of lies. He let out a long breath. But there was something else, Nicole. Something she said in that phone call that I don't understand, but I think you need to know about. What? She kept talking about your grandmother's house. She brought it up with me before too during the wedding planning. She'd ask strange questions like, who do you think deserves it more? Or, Lauren will need that security, don't you think? At the time, I thought she was just making conversation about family property. But last night on the phone, she said something like, the house situation is handled. I made sure of that years ago. Why would she be so obsessed with a house? I felt something cold settle in my chest, a realization trying to form, but not quite there yet. I don't know. Well, whatever it is, I think it's connected to everything else. Your mother has been playing some kind of long game, and we were all pieces on her board. After we hung up, I sat on that bench for a long time, watching the last light fade from the sky and the stars begin to emerge. My mind was turning over everything Mark had told me, examining it from different angles, trying to understand the full scope of what my mother had done. She'd lied about my relationship status to manipulate Mark away from me and toward Lauren. She'd orchestrated their entire relationship. She'd been obsessed with my grandmother's house for reasons that seemed to go deeper than simple family nostalgia. And then I remembered something I'd forgotten, or perhaps deliberately not thought about for 5 years. When my grandmother died, my mother had handled everything as executor of the estate. She told Lauren and me that Grandma had split everything equally between us, that it was all very straightforward, that the house would be sold and the proceeds divided. But I'd never actually seen the will. I'd never asked to see it because I trusted my mother to tell me the truth. I'd been so deep in grief over losing Grandma and so trained to be the understanding daughter who didn't make waves that I'd simply accepted what I was told. Mother had controlled all the information. Mother had been obsessed with the house. Mother had been caught in a massive, elaborate lie about my relationship status. And suddenly, I remembered Grandma's will, the one Mum said was all handled, the one I never actually got to read. I spent the rest of Saturday evening and all of Sunday in a strange state of suspended animation. I went through the motions of vacation breakfast by the pool, a spa appointment I'd booked days ago, dinner at an overpriced restaurant with an ocean view, but my mind was elsewhere, turning over Mark's words, like stones examining them from every angle. My phone continued to buzz with messages, but I'd learned something powerful in the past 24 hours. I could choose not to respond. The world would not end if I didn't immediately make myself available to solve my family's crisis. This was a revelation that felt almost dangerous in its simplicity. By Sunday evening, I had 43 missed calls and 68 text messages. I skimmed through them with clinical detachment, watching the progression from confusion to panic to barely contained hysteria. My father had called twice, leaving voicemails that consisted mostly of throat clearing and, "Please call when you can, sweetheart." Aunt Carol had sent a series of increasingly urgent texts. Even my cousin Jennifer, who I hadn't heard from in 2 years, had reached out with, "Where are you? We need you." But I didn't call back. Not yet. I was learning to sit with their need to let it exist without immediately rushing to fill it. This too felt revolutionary. Monday morning in Hawaii was beautiful, the kind of crystalline sunshine that seemed to promise everything would be fine. I took my coffee down to the beach and watched surfers catch early morning waves, their movements graceful and effortless against the blue water. I was reading the same page of my novel for the 3rd time, unable to concentrate when my phone rang with my mother's number. I let it ring 4 times before answering. A small act of resistance, but it mattered. "Nicole." My mother's voice stopped me cold. I'd heard her sound many ways over the years, imperious, disappointed, coolly, angry, artificially cheerful. But I'd never heard her sound like this. Small, shaking, almost childlike in its vulnerability. "Mum," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Nicole, Please, I'm begging you, come home. We need you. The words tumbled out fast as if she'd been rehearsing them, but couldn't quite control their delivery. Please. I said nothing, waiting. In the silence, I could hear her breathing ragged and uneven. Lauren won't eat, she continued, her voice breaking. She won't talk to anyone. She's locked herself in her old bedroom and won't come out. Your father doesn't know what to do. I don't know what to do. She's breaking Nicole. And Mark, she paused and I heard her swallow hard. Mark will only talk to you. He won't answer calls from any of us. Only you can fix this. Please, come home. This was the first time in my 36 years that my mother had ever used the word please with me more than once in a single conversation. The first time she'd admitted not knowing what to do. The first time she'd acknowledged needing me specifically, not just needing any warm body to handle a problem. I don't know if I can fix this, Mom, I said carefully. I'm not sure it's my responsibility to fix it. You're right. You're absolutely right. Her agreement shocked me more than anything else. But, Nicole, she's your sister, and she's falling apart. Whatever happened with Mark, whatever confusion there was, Lauren needs you now. We all need you. I let the silence stretch again, feeling the weight of it, the shift in power that came from being the one whose help was sought, rather than the one whose help was expected. Over the next 12 hours, the calls continued. Aunt Carol reached me Monday evening, her voice tight with a mixture of concern and something that sounded almost like reproach. Nicole, honey, where are you? We're all worried sick. Your sister needs you right now. She paused, then added, You were always the sensible one, the one who could handle anything. The family needs your strength. Please, come home and help her. Uncle Jim left a voicemail that I listened to while eating a room service dinner on my balcony. Nicole, it's Jim. Listen, I know you and Lauren have had your differences, but family needs to stick together in hard times. You're the strongest one we have, always have been. Your sister could really use you right now. Even people I barely knew reached out. Lauren's college roommate, whom I'd met exactly once at graduation 7 years ago, sent a Facebook message. Hey Nicole, I heard about the wedding. I know you and Lauren are close. She needs her sister right now. Hope you can be there for her. The irony of this sudden designation as Lauren's close, supportive sister wasn't lost on me. None of these people had noticed or cared when I was excluded from the wedding. But now in crisis, I was suddenly essential, necessary, the strong one who could handle anything. It was intoxicating and infuriating in equal measure. Tuesday morning, my mother called again. This time her voice had a different quality, not just desperate, but calculating. She was regrouping, trying to find the right leverage. Nicole, I know you're upset with us. I know we've made mistakes. But if you come home and help Lauren through this, I'll make it right. I'll give you anything you want. Anything. She paused, and I could almost hear her deciding whether to say what came next. I'll show you anything, even your grandmother's papers, all the estate documents, whatever you need to see. I'll be completely transparent about everything. And there it was. The slip. The tell. Why would she specifically mention my grandmother's papers? Why would access to estate documents be offered as a bargaining chip? Those were documents I had every legal right to see already as a beneficiary, unless there was something in them she'd been hiding, unless transparency was something she'd been carefully avoiding for 5 years. Mark's words from Saturday night echoed in my head. Your mother kept talking about your grandmother's house. She kept saying things like, the house situation is handled. I felt a click of understanding pieces falling into place to form a picture I didn't yet fully see but knew was there. I'll think about it, I said, keeping my voice even. I'll let you know. After I hung up, I sat on my balcony, watching the sun move across the sky, casting different shadows across the water. For the first time in my life, my family needed me. Not because I was conveniently available or because I was the understanding one who could be counted on to absorb pain without complaint. They needed me because I held something they wanted: my willingness to help, my ability to reach my potential to stabilize their public catastrophe. And more than that, my mother had just revealed, however inadvertently, that there were documents she'd been keeping from me. Documents about my grandmother's estate that she suddenly felt the need to offer access to, as if that access were hers to grant rather than my right to demand. They needed me. For the first time in my entire life, they actually needed me, and I was going to make them pay for it with the truth. That evening, I FaceTimed Karen from my hotel room. She answered on the first ring, her face filling the screen with a mixture of concern and barely suppressed curiosity. "Okay, Spill," she said without preamble. "I've been getting your cryptic texts for 3 days and I'm dying here. What's happening?" I filled her in on everything Mark's call, the revelation about my mother's manipulation, the desperate phone calls from family members, and most significantly, my mother's strange offer to show me my grandmother's papers. Karen listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger to something that looked almost like admiration. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Nicole," she finally said, "this is bigger than you thought. This isn't just about a wedding or favoritism. Your mother has been conducting a decades-long campaign of control." "I know," I said. "I'm starting to see that, but I don't know what to do with it." "Write it down," Karen said immediately. "Everything, every memory, every slight, every moment you felt invisible. Sometimes we're too close to our own stories to see the pattern clearly, but if you write it, if you lay it all out, you'll see what's really been happening. And more importantly, you'll have a record. Documentation, evidence." After we hung up, I took her advice. I ordered a bottle of wine from room service, poured myself a generous glass, and settled onto my balcony with my laptop. The ocean was dark now, just the sound of waves and the distant lights of boats on the horizon. I opened a new document and titled it simply, "The Pattern." I started with the earliest memory I could recall of being made invisible. I was 7 years old at my school's annual art show. I'd won first place in my grade for a painting of our family cat. I'd been so proud, so excited to show my parents. But when we got there, my mother had spent the entire event talking to other parents about Lauren's upcoming dance recital, barely glancing at my award. On the drive home, she'd said, "That's nice, dear," when I'd tried to show her the ribbon, then immediately pivoted to discussing what dress Lauren should wear for her performance. I wrote it all down. The 16th birthday party that became Lauren's celebration. The college graduation where my summa cum laude honour was mentioned in passing, dismissed as Nicole being Nicole, always so capable, while we spent dinner discussing Lauren's breakup. The 3 years I'd spent as grandma's primary caregiver, visiting every single day after work to help her eat, bathe, manage her medications, read to her, hold her hand through the pain and fear and confusion of dying. 3 years while Lauren visited twice and received effusive praise from the family for being there in Grandma's final days. The family photos where I'd been cropped to the edges or excluded entirely. The Christmas cards that featured Lauren prominently while I was a barely visible figure in the background. The countless times my achievements had been minimized with phrases like, "Well, you've always been good at that," or "That's what we expected from you," while Lauren's mediocre accomplishments were celebrated as revolutionary breakthroughs. As I wrote, something crystallized that I'd been unable to see while living through it. This wasn't random favoritism or unconscious bias. Every single incident had my mother's fingerprints all over it. She was the one who decided whose birthday got celebrated. She was the one who steered conversations away from my accomplishments and toward Lauren's needs. She was the one who had positioned me as strong enough not to need support, and Lauren as fragile, requiring protection and resources. My mother had written the family narrative, cast us in our roles, and directed every scene, and we'd all played our parts perfectly, me most of all. I thought about Mark's words, "Your mother kept bringing up your grandmother's house in our conversations." And her, slip on the phone, I'll show you your grandmother's papers, all the estate documents. She'd controlled the romantic narrative, steering Mark away from me and toward Lauren. She'd controlled the family narrative, deciding who deserved attention and celebration. Why wouldn't she also control the financial narrative? Why wouldn't she control what happened to Grandma's house, to the inheritance, to the estate, the will? The will I'd never seen, but had simply accepted her summary of everything split equally between you two. It's all handled. I poured another glass of wine and stared out at the dark ocean. My phone buzzed with another text, my mother again asking if I'd made a decision about coming home. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Karen back. That was fast, she said. Did the writing help? It did, Karen. I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest. Always. What do you want me to do? What do you think I should do? She was quiet for a moment. That's not the right question, Nicole. The question is, what do you want? Do you want revenge, justice, or do you just want peace? I watched the waves rolling in their rhythm, eternal and indifferent to human drama. The question hung in the air between us, and I realized I'd been avoiding asking myself that directly. I want all three, I said slowly, the words forming as I spoke them. I want revenge for 36 years of being erased. I want justice for whatever my mother has been hiding about Grandma's estate. And I want peace, but not the false peace of swallowing everything and pretending it didn't happen. Real peace earned through truth. Okay, Karen said carefully. And what does that look like, practically speaking? Revenge will be watching them beg and knowing I have the power to walk away, knowing they need me for once instead of me always needing them to see me. I felt something settle in my chest, a kind of clarity I'd never experienced before. Justice will be exposing what was done, not just to me, but to Grandma's wishes, if I'm right about the will. Taking back what was stolen, whether that's money or dignity or just the truth. And peace. Peace will be walking away on my own terms with my head high, knowing I didn't stay silent. Knowing I told my story and made them hear it, even if they didn't want to listen. Karen was quiet, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. That's not the meek, understanding Nicole I've known for 10 years. Maybe that Nicole needed to die so this one could exist. So what's your first move? I smiled, feeling something fierce and certain rising in my chest. I'm going to go home. I'm going to tell my mother I'll help with Lauren, that I'll talk to Mark, that I'll do whatever she needs. And in exchange, I'm going to make her show me Grandma's will, the real one. Every document, every piece of paper related to the estate. I'm going to make that the price of my help. And if she refuses, she won't refuse. She's desperate and she thinks I'm still the understanding daughter who can be managed and controlled. She doesn't know I've changed. She doesn't know I'm done being managed. Nicole, Karen said, and her voice was serious now. Are you sure about this? Once you start pulling this thread, you can't unknow what you find. I'm sure. For the first time in my life, I'm completely sure. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony for another hour, feeling the warm night air on my skin, listening to the ocean, letting my decisions settle into my bones. My family had controlled my story for 36 years. They'd decided what I was worth, what I deserved, who I was allowed to be. For once, my story would finally be told by me. And I'd start by making them hand me what they'd hidden for 5 years. I flew home on Wednesday morning, 1 full week after the wedding that never happened. The timing was deliberate. I'd finished my vacation as planned, refusing to cut it short despite the increasingly frantic messages from my family. Let them wait. Let them understand that my time, my peace, my presence had value. When I pulled up to my parents' house Wednesday afternoon, my mother rushed out before I'd even turned off the car. She looked older than I remembered, her face drawn with exhaustion and something that might have been genuine fear. She hugged me on the driveway, something she rarely did, and I felt her trembling. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "Thank you." I patted her back awkwardly, playing my role. Of course, Mum. We're family. The relief on her face was almost painful to witness. She thought I was still the old Nicole, the understanding one who could be counted on to absorb crisis and smooth over disaster. She had no idea I'd changed. "Lauren's upstairs," my mother said as we walked into the house. "She barely comes out. Your father and I don't know what to do." I found my sister exactly where my mother had said, in her childhood bedroom, which she'd apparently moved back into. The room was dark, despite the afternoon sun outside, curtains drawn, and it smelled stale, like grief and unwashed sheets. Lauren was curled on her bed, still in pyjamas, though it was past 2 in the afternoon. "Lauren," I said softly from the doorway. She turned to look at me, and I was genuinely shocked by what I saw. My sister, who'd always been effortlessly beautiful, looked hollow. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her skin sallow, her hair unwashed and tangled. She looked at me for a long moment, and I couldn't read her expression. "You came," she finally said, her voice hoarse. "I came." Over the next hour, I learned the full extent of the damage. Lauren had been quietly let go from her marketing coordinator position, the company citing organizational restructuring. But everyone knew it was because the scandal had become too much of a distraction. She was deeply in debt, having maxed out 3 credit cards on wedding expenses she'd expected Mark's income to help cover. She'd been planning to move in with him after the wedding, give up her apartment, start fresh. Now she had no job, no home of her own, crushing debt, and a humiliation so public that she couldn't go to the grocery store without people whispering. "I thought he loved me," she said at one point, staring at her hands. "I thought I was building something real." I felt a complicated surge of emotion, looking at her pity for her genuine pain, anger at the role she'd played in my exclusion, and a strange sort of understanding that she too had been a piece on our mother's board. She'd been given advantages. I never had. Yes, but she'd also been made fragile, dependent, unable to stand on her own. Mother's favoritism had damaged us both, just in different ways. For the next several days, I played my role perfectly. I helped deal with angry vendors who wanted final payments. I coordinated the return of wedding gifts. I fielded phone calls from relatives and friends, providing calm, measured responses about unforeseen circumstances and Lauren needing space to heal. I made myself useful in exactly the way my family expected me to be useful. But while I did all this, I watched. I observed patterns, routines, opportunities. I noticed that my mother kept her handbag with her at all times, even when moving between rooms in her own house. I noticed she was protective of her bedroom, always closing the door, sometimes locking it when she left the house. I noticed she seemed nervous around me in a way she never had before, watching me with a kind of wariness, as if trying to determine whether I was genuinely helping or harbouring resentment. She was right to be wary. On the 5th day, Friday morning, my mother announced she needed to drive to Brentwood to visit her sister Diane for the weekend. It was a 2-hour drive, and she'd be staying overnight back Sunday afternoon. "Will you be all right here with your father and Lauren?" she asked, and I saw the conflict in her face. She didn't want to leave, but apparently the visit had been planned for weeks and couldn't be postponed. "We'll be fine, Mum," I assured her. "Lauren needs you to take care of yourself too. Go see Aunt Diane." After she left with my father safely at his weekly golf game and Lauren sleeping in her room, I went upstairs to my parents' bedroom. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I'd waited for this moment, planned for it, and now it was here. I started with the obvious places: dresser drawers, the closet shelf under the bed. Nothing. Then I moved to the back of my mother's closet, the deep section behind the hanging clothes where old storage boxes were stacked. That's where I found it. A small fireproof safe, maybe a foot square, tucked behind several boxes of old sweaters that clearly hadn't been touched in years. It was the kind of safe meant for important documents, too small for much cash, but perfect for papers you wanted protected and hidden. I pulled it out and set it on the floor, my heart hammering now. It had a combination lock, 4 digits. I tried the obvious combinations first: my parents' anniversary, my mother's birthday, my father's birthday. Nothing. Then I tried my grandmother's birthday, 0719. July 19th. The safe clicked open. Inside was a collection of documents that I immediately understood my mother had never intended me to see. There was a photocopy of what appeared to be a will, but it was marked up with handwritten notes in the margins in my mother's distinctive script. Comments like, "too much" and "needs to be addressed," and "Lauren," next to various provisions. There were several letters from a law firm I didn't recognise correspondence about estate planning and executor duties. And there at the bottom, carefully folded, was a letter in my grandmother's handwriting. The date at the top was 6 months before she died. My hand shook as I unfolded it. "My dearest Margaret," it began, "I'm writing this as I finalise my will, and I need you to understand my intentions. I know you worry about your girls about making sure they're both provided for. I'm writing this will to protect them both equally, not in money alone, but in acknowledgement of what each has given me." I kept reading, my vision blurring slightly with tears I hadn't expected. Nicole has been my constant companion these past years. She visits every day, helps me with dignity when I can't help myself, sits with me through the fear and pain. Lauren visits when she can, and I know she loves me in her way. But Nicole has earned something special through her devotion, and I want to honour that. I need you to promise me something, Margaret. Don't let money poison their relationship. Don't sacrifice one daughter to save the other. You have 2 precious girls. Treat them both as precious, but recognise that equity doesn't always mean equal division. Nicole has given me the gift of a peaceful death. She deserves to know her efforts mattered. The letter continued with specific instructions about the will, about making sure Nicole understood how much her grandmother had valued her care, about ensuring that both daughters knew they were loved, but that different types of love sometimes call for different types of recognition. I sat on my parents' bedroom floor, holding my grandmother's letter, and felt something crack open inside me. My grandmother had seen me, had valued me, had wanted to honour the 3 years I'd spent caring for her. And somehow, that recognition had been taken from me. I looked at the marked-up copy of the will, at my mother's anxious annotations, at the legal correspondence discussing executor discretion and interpretation of testator's intent. Mom had been playing a game I didn't even know existed, and the stakes were my entire life. I sat on that floor for several minutes, holding my grandmother's letter, letting the reality of what I'd found settle over me like a weight. Then I forced myself to move to think practically. I had limited time. My mother would be back Sunday afternoon, and I needed to document everything I'd found and look for more. I took out my phone and photographed every document in the safe. The annotated will copy, my grandmother's letter. The correspondence from the law firm. I took multiple shots from different angles, making sure every word was legible, every notation visible. Only when I was certain I had clear images of everything did I carefully return the documents to exactly how I'd found them, closed the safe, and moved it back to its hiding place behind the sweater boxes. Then I sat at my parents' bed and really looked at the photographs on my phone, zooming in to read the details I'd been too overwhelmed to fully process in the moment. The will photocopy was clearly a working document, not an official version. At the top, in faded typewriter text, it read, "Draft for review only," and was dated April 15th, 5 years ago. The language was formal and somewhat convoluted in the way legal documents always were, but the key passage was clear enough. I direct that my real property located at 1847 Maple Drive, and all assets of my estate shall be distributed to the granddaughter who demonstrates through clear evidence of actions taken that she loved and cared for me most substantially during my final years of life. In the margin, next to this paragraph, my mother had written in pen, "Too vague how to prove both girls love her," and below that, "needs objective standard." Further down, where the will described the house and its sentimental value, my mother had drawn an asterisk and written, "Lauren will need this more. N has career." The annotations revealed my mother's thinking, her attempt to rationalise what she was planning to do, but they didn't tell me what she'd actually done. For that, I needed to see what had been officially filed with the probate court. Over the next 2 days, while maintaining my facade of the helpful daughter, making meals, checking on Lauren, having stilted conversations with my father, I conducted my investigation in stolen moments. Saturday morning, while everyone else was occupied, I went down to the basement. I'd remembered seeing old storage down there, boxes and trunks that had belonged to my grandmother and had been moved to my parents' house after she died. My mother rarely went down there. She hated basements, said they were musty and depressing. I found my grandmother's old steamer trunk in the corner, covered with a tarp and surrounded by Christmas decorations. I opened it carefully, not sure what I was looking for, but trusting my instincts. Inside, beneath some folded quilts, I found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were addressed to me in my grandmother's shaky handwriting, dating from the last 3 years of her life. Letters I'd never received. I untied the ribbon with trembling hands and read through them one by one. They were chatty, full of love and gratitude and small observations about daily life, but woven through them was a consistent thread. Nicole, my dear girl, you are my sunshine. Your visits are the highlight of my days. You help me bathe without making me feel ashamed. You read to me even when I fall asleep mid-sentence. You hold my hand through the pain and fear. Lauren called today. She sounded busy. I know she has her own life and I'm proud of her. But you show up every single day. That kind of love is rare, precious. I'm making arrangements for after I'm gone. I want you to know that your kindness has been seen, valued, cherished. You've given me the gift of dignity in my dying. That deserves recognition. I sat on the cold basement floor, reading letter after letter, and realised my mother must have intercepted them. My grandmother had written to me consistently, and somehow these letters had ended up in a trunk in a basement instead of in my hands. They were proof, concrete dated proof that I'd been the primary caregiver, that my grandmother had recognised and valued my care, that she'd intended to recognise my devotion in some material way. I photographed every letter, then returned them carefully to the trunk. That evening, after my father had gone to bed and Lauren was safely in her room, I used my laptop to access the county probate court records. They were public records searchable online, and it didn't take long to find my grandmother's case. The will that had been officially filed and probated was dated April 15th of the previous year, exactly 1 year before the draft I'd found in my mother's safe. I downloaded the PDF and compared it carefully to the photographs of the draft. The earlier will was simpler, more straightforward. It stated, I direct that my estate be divided equally between my 2 granddaughters, Lauren, Margaret Barnes and Nicole Ann Barnes, share and share alike. No mention of caregiving, no mention of demonstrated love, just a simple equal split. But as I dug deeper into the documents on the court website, I found something else, a filing receipt showing that my mother, as executor, had submitted the will for probate on June the 3rd, 3 days after my grandmother had died on May 31st. And there, in the case notes, was a reference that made my blood run cold. Decedent's attorney of record, James Thornton Eskakikikshire. I pulled up the photographs from my mother's safe and found the correspondence from the law firm. There were several letters from James Thornton to my grandmother, the most recent dated May 23rd, just 8 days before she died. The subject line read, Re-final will review meeting, confirmation of amendments. I read the letter 3 times, my mind working through the implications. My grandmother had met with her attorney 1 week before she died to finalise amendments to her will, but the will that was filed for probate was dated a full year earlier before those amendments. My mother hadn't filed the final version. She'd filed an older version and buried the updated one. I spent the next hour searching for any information about James Thornton online. I found his law firm's website easily enough, but a banner at the top announced James Thornton retired from active practice in June 5 years ago, For assistance with existing matters, please contact. The timing was perfect for my mother's purposes. The attorney who knew about the final amendments had retired immediately after my grandmother's death, probably unaware that the wrong version of the will had been filed. And my mother, as executor, had been able to control the entire narrative. I sat back in my chair, staring at my laptop screen, piecing it together. My mother hadn't forged my grandmother's signature. She hadn't created a fake document. She'd done something much simpler and harder to prove, or she'd found an old version of the will, a version that split everything equally, and filed that one. Then she'd hidden or destroyed the final version that would have given me the house and assets in recognition of my caregiving. It was elegant in its simplicity. If anyone asked, she could say she'd filed the will she found among my grandmother's papers. How was she to know there was a more recent version the attorney had retired and probably hadn't followed up? Except she did know. The letter from Thornton in her safe proved she knew about the final meeting, the amendments. And my grandmother's letter to her pleading with her to honour both daughters but acknowledge Nicole's specific contribution proved she'd been explicitly asked not to do exactly what she'd done. Mum didn't forge a signature. She did something smarter. She buried the final version and pretended an old draft was all that existed. My father asked me on a Tuesday morning if I'd help him organise his home office. He stood in the kitchen doorway, coffee cup in hand, with that slightly apologetic expression he always wore when asking for anything. "I know you're busy with Lauren and everything," he said, "but I've been meaning to sort through those filing cabinets for years. Your mother keeps saying I should get it done. Would you mind lending a hand?" I almost said no. I was tired, emotionally exhausted from weeks of playing a role while conducting my secret investigation. But something in his face, a kind of desperate hopelessness, made me agree. We worked in companionable silence for the first hour, pulling out old tax returns and bank statements, sorting them into piles for shredding or keeping. My father's office was a shrine to avoidance, every drawer and cabinet stuffed with papers he'd meant to deal with someday. It was oddly fitting. I was working through the bottom drawer of his desk when I found it, an envelope yellowed with age tucked behind hanging folders that clearly hadn't been touched in years. The envelope was sealed, and across the front in my father's neat handwriting was just one word, Nicole. I held it for a moment, my heart suddenly pounding. My father had stepped out to answer a phone call. I could hear him in the hallway, his voice low and indistinct. My hands shook slightly as I carefully opened the envelope, trying not to tear the aged paper. Inside was a letter, several pages covered in my father's handwriting. The date at the top was from 5 years ago, just months after my grandmother had died. Nicole, my dear daughter. It began, and I had to pause, steadying my breathing before I could continue reading. If you're reading this, it means I lacked the courage to give it to you in person. I've written and rewritten this letter a dozen times over the past 5 years, and each time I convinced myself I'll find the right moment to hand it to you. But the moment never comes because I'm a coward. I sat down heavily in my father's desk chair, the letter trembling in my hands. I know what your mother did. I saw how you were overlooked, how Lauren was elevated at your expense. I watched it happen for decades and said nothing. When you were 12 years old at that family reunion at your grandmother's house, your mother called you simple in front of everyone. I saw your face when she said it. I saw something die in your eyes that day. I should have defended you. I should have taken your mother aside and told her that was unacceptable. I didn't. I told myself it would blow over, that making a scene would only make things worse. I chose peace over protection, and I've regretted it every day since. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I kept reading. The will was the final straw, Nicole. I need you to know that I knew. Your grandmother called me 2 weeks before she died. She was very clear, very intentional. She told me she was leaving the house to you specifically because you'd earned it through years of devoted care. She said Lauren was lovely, but distracted by her own life, while you had shown up every single day, had held her hand through fear and pain, had given her dignity in her dying. She wanted me to know her intentions in case anything happened to her before the final version was signed and notarized. I stopped reading, pressing my hand to my mouth to stifle a sob. He knew. My father had known from the beginning. When your grandmother died suddenly of that stroke, your mother took over as executor. I came home from work one night about a week after the funeral and found her in the fireplace room burning papers. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was disposing of old drafts of the will, that they were confusing, and she didn't want anyone to be misled. I didn't say anything, but I knew. I knew what she was doing. My hands were shaking so badly now I could barely hold the pages. I should have stopped her right then. I should have demanded to see what she was burning. I should have called the attorney, insisted on transparency, protected your inheritance and your grandmother's wishes. But I didn't. I told myself it was complicated, that Lauren needed the money more than you did, that you were strong and capable and would be fine without it. I told myself that keeping the peace in my marriage was worth the price of your loss. I was wrong, Nicole. I was so terribly wrong. The letter continued, my father listing other moments where he'd failed me. Other times he'd witnessed my mother's manipulation and chosen silence. Every word was another layer of betrayal, another weight added to the crushing realization that both my parents had failed me, just in different ways. I've wanted to tell you 1,000 times. I've picked up the phone, started writing emails, rehearsed conversations in my head. But I'm ashamed. I'm deeply, profoundly ashamed of my cowardice. And I don't know how to face you with this truth. So I write this letter and seal it and tell myself that someday I'll find the courage to give it to you. But I know I won't. I know I'll keep this hidden, another secret, to add to the collection, because facing your disappointment is more than I can bear. I'm sorry, my dear girl. I'm so sorry. The letter ended, there no signature, just those final words of apology that somehow made it worse rather than better. I sat in my father's chair holding his confession and felt something fundamental shift inside me. My mother's betrayal had been active. She'd lied, manipulated, destroyed documents, constructed elaborate schemes. It was monstrous, but at least it was visible, identifiable. My father's betrayal was different. It was the betrayal of inaction of witness, without intervention, of choosing his own comfort over his daughter's welfare. He'd seen me being erased and said nothing. He'd known about the will and did nothing. He'd watched my mother burn documents that rightfully belonged to me and chose silence. In some ways, his betrayal cut deeper. I heard his footsteps in the hallway returning from his call. I looked up as he appeared in the doorway and watched his face transform when he saw what I was holding. All the colour drained from his cheeks. His mouth opened but no sound came out. We stared at each other across the cluttered office for a long moment. I saw everything in his face, the shame, the fear, the resignation of a man who'd been caught in his cowardice. I never sent it, he finally whispered, because I was ashamed. I'm still ashamed. I stood up slowly, carefully folding the letter and putting it in my pocket. My father didn't move, didn't try to stop me, didn't reach for me. He just stood there, diminished, an old man who'd spent his life choosing the easy path. You should be, I said quietly. Then I walked past him, out of his office, out of the house, and sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, crying harder than I'd cried since I was a child. My mother had stolen my inheritance, but my father had watched her do it and said nothing. He'd known about my grandmother's intentions and let them be buried. He'd witnessed my erasure for 36 years and prioritised his own peace over my protection. Dad chose Lauren's weakness over my strength, and it cost me everything. But I wasn't going to let his silence define my future. I spent 2 weeks planning the dinner. 2 weeks deciding exactly who to invite, where they would sit, what I would serve, and most importantly, when I would ask the questions that would crack open my mother's carefully constructed facade. Every choice was deliberate. The timing exactly 4 weeks after the wedding disaster, when everyone was still raw but desperate for normalcy. The location, my parents' dining room, forcing my mother to play hostess on her own territory while I controlled the conversation. The guest list family members who'd witnessed a lifetime of favoritism, whose presence would make denial impossible. And David Chen, most especially David Chen. I'd known David peripherally for years. He'd been at that charity dinner where Mark and I first met, and we'd exchanged business cards because he'd been writing a piece on local marketing firms. He'd since moved into human interest stories for the local paper. When I'd called him and suggested a story about families navigating public scandal with grace and reconciliation, he'd been immediately interested. "The Barnes family is pretty well known around here," he'd said. "A piece about how you're all coming together after the wedding situation could be really compelling. Redemption narratives always resonate." I'd smiled into the phone. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. Truth and reconciliation. I didn't mention that the truth I had in mind wasn't the truth my mother would want told. As I set the table that evening, arranging the good china my mother insisted on for company, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't anxious. I was focused, purposeful, moving through the preparations with the precision of someone executing a carefully designed plan. This wasn't about truth for truth's sake. This was about control. They'd controlled my narrative for 36 years. Who I was, what I was worth, whether I deserved to be seen or celebrated or even remembered. They'd controlled my grandmother's legacy, decided which version of her final wishes the world would see. Now, I was taking that control back one carefully orchestrated conversation at a time. My mother had been suspicious when I'd first proposed the dinner. "A dinner party?" "Now, Nicole, I'm not sure we're ready for that kind of social. It's just family mum and David Chen from the newspaper. He wants to write a piece about families that overcome challenges together. Think about it, everyone's been talking about us for weeks. This is a chance to change the narrative, show that we're united, that we've moved past the scandal." I'd watched her face as she processed this, saw the moment she couldn't resist the lure of rehabilitating our public image. Margaret Barnes could survive many things, but being the subject of pitying gossip wasn't one of them. "Well," she'd said slowly, "if it's just family and one reporter, I suppose it could be appropriate." "I'll handle all the arrangements," I'd assured her. "You won't have to worry about a thing." Now, as guests arrived and filled the dining room with careful chatter, I played the perfect hostess. I seated David between Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim, positioned strategically where he could observe the whole table. I put my mother at one end, my father at the other. Lauren sat beside my mother, still fragile, still hollow-eyed, but making an effort to appear recovered. Dinner started exactly as I designed it to start, with comfortable small talk. The weather, which had been unusually warm, the new restaurant opening downtown, Uncle Jim's golf game. The kind of safe topics that allowed everyone to relax, to believe this was just a normal family dinner. I served the main course, my grandmother's recipe for pot roast, a deliberate choice that no one commented on, but everyone registered. As people ate, I let the conversation meander naturally, waiting for the right moment. It came during a lull after David had complimented the meal, and my mother had graciously accepted, when the table had fallen into that comfortable silence of people enjoying good food. "You know," I said, my voice casual, conversational, "I've been thinking about Grandma so much lately, especially with all the family being together like this. It made me realise something embarrassing. I never actually read her will. I mean, you told us what it said, Mum, but I never saw the actual document." I saw my mother's hand pause fractionally as she reached for her water glass. My father's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Lauren looked up, confused by the sudden shift in topic. "Oh, honey," my mother said, her voice maintaining its warmth, but with an edge of forced patience. "It was very simple. Everything was to be split equally between you and Lauren. It's all been handled. There's really nothing to see." Still, I continued smiling. I'd love to actually read it sometime, just to feel connected to her, to see her words. David, who I'd briefed beforehand about asking certain questions at certain moments, looked up from his pasta with professional interest. That's lovely family legacy is such an important part of what I want to capture in this piece. For the background section, would you mind if I verified the estate details with the probate court records, just for accuracy? I like to fact-check everything. The table went very quiet. It was subtle, most people probably didn't even consciously register the shift, but I felt it like a change in air pressure before a storm. My mother's face went pale. Not dramatically, but enough that I could see it could read the fear in her eyes. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down her wineglass, the crystal making a small clink against the wood. "I'm sure that won't be necessary," she said, her voice tight. "Oh, it's no trouble," David said pleasantly. "Public records are easy to access. Takes just a few minutes online these days." My mother shot me a look, not angry, yet not openly hostile, but calculating. I watched her trying to work out how much I knew what game I was playing, whether this was innocent or intentional. Her eyes met mine across the table, and I held her gaze steadily, letting her see that yes, I knew everything. My father stared down at his plate, his knuckles white around his fork. Lauren looked between us, confused by the tension she could feel but couldn't identify. Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim exchanged uncertain glances. "I'm sure everything will match up perfectly," I said, my voice sweet, controlled with just enough emphasis on perfectly to land like a threat. "Right, Mum, since it's all been handled so carefully, since you were such a thorough executor." The air in the room crackled with something everyone could feel now, even if they didn't understand it. It was the feeling of secrets about to surface, of carefully constructed facades beginning to crumble, of a reckoning that had been postponed for 5 years finally arriving at the dinner table. My mother's face had gone from pale to white. She knew. She knew that I knew, and she knew that I'd just set in motion something she couldn't stop. In front of witnesses, in front of a reporter, in front of family members who would remember this moment, who would start asking their own questions. Mum's face went white. She knew that I knew. And now, so did everyone else at that table. This was my revenge, truth served cold in front of witnesses who could never be silenced. David's article ran in the Sunday edition of the local paper 1 week after the dinner. I bought 3 copies at different stores, spreading them across my kitchen table and reading the piece multiple times, savouring every carefully worded sentence. The headline read, "Legacy and Loss, the Complex Reality of Family Inheritance." David had been brilliant. He'd written nothing actionable, nothing that could be considered libelous, but the implications were clear to anyone reading carefully. He described the Barnes family as a case study in the complications that can arise when estate distribution lacks transparent documentation. He quoted generic legal experts about the importance of proper probate procedures. He mentioned almost in passing that questions have emerged about whether all relevant documentation was properly filed in the Barnes estate case. The article never directly accused my mother of anything, but it painted a picture of confusion, of potential oversight, of a family dealing with unresolved questions about their matriarch's final wishes. By Monday morning, the article had been shared on social media 47 times. By Monday afternoon, people were commenting. Old friends of my grandmother's neighbours who'd known our family for decades, people who'd watched me care for Grandma during those final years. "I always wondered about that will situation," wrote Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived next door to my grandmother. "Nicole was there every single day for 3 years. Lauren visited maybe twice. Eleanor told me she wanted to make sure Nicole was taken care of," commented someone named Richard Chen, who'd apparently been in my grandmother's book club. She said Nicole had given her such peace in her dying. I assumed that was reflected in the estate. I watched the comments accumulate with a mixture of satisfaction and something more complicated, a kind of grief for my grandmother, whose wishes had been buried and were only now, 5 years later, beginning to surface. On Monday evening, my mother called. I didn't answer. She called again, Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening. Each voicemail was increasingly desperate, increasingly angry. "Nicole, what have you done? That article is humiliating. How could you call me immediately?" "Nicole, people are saying terrible things. You need to fix this. You need to tell that reporter he got it wrong. Nicole, please, we need to talk about this. As a family." I didn't return any of the calls. Let her sit with it. Let her feel what it was like to have no control over the narrative, to watch her carefully constructed version of reality crack in public view. On Wednesday morning, 4 days after the article ran, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognise. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another family member calling from a different line, but something made me pick up. "Ms. Barnes, Nicole Barnes." The voice was elderly male, careful. "Yes, this is Nicole. My name is James Thornton. I was your grandmother's attorney. I read the article in Sunday's paper." He paused, and I heard him take a slow breath. "We need to talk. I have something you need to see." My heart began pounding. "Mr. Thornton, I've been hoping to reach you. I found some correspondence." "I know what you found," he said quietly. "Or at least I can guess. I've been wrestling with this for 3 days, Ms. Barnes. Attorney, client privilege, professional ethics, my own conscience. But your grandmother was very clear about her intentions, and I've carried the guilt of my silence for 5 years. Can you come to my house today if possible? I'm at 847 Maple Grove Drive." I was in my car within 10 minutes, Mr. Thornton's house was a modest Cape Cod in an older neighbourhood, the kind of place that spoke of a long, quiet career in small-town law. He met me at the door, a thin man in his 70s with wire-rimmed glasses and the slightly stooped posture of someone who'd spent decades hunched over documents. He led me to his home office lined with law books and smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and old paper. He gestured for me to sit, then settled himself behind his desk with the air of a man about to confess something that had weighed on him for a long time. "I retired 5 years ago," he began, "right after your grandmother passed. It was timing I'd planned for months, but in retrospect, perhaps I should have delayed. Perhaps if I'd still been actively practicing, I would have followed up more carefully on the probate filing." He opened a laptop that looked incongruous on his antique desk and turned it toward me. On the screen was an email, the inbox interface clearly from 5 years ago. "Your grandmother sent me this 1 week before she died, May 23rd. She'd been feeling increasingly unwell and wanted to make sure her affairs were in order." I leaned forward, reading the subject line, "Final, will revision, please keep secure." She was very clear with me during our meeting that week. Miss Thornton continued. She wanted to revise her will to leave everything the house, the remaining assets to you specifically. She said, and I quote, "Nicole earned this through devotion, not obligation. She showed me what love looks like in action. Lauren is lovely, but she visited twice in 3 years. Nicole was there every day." He clicked on the attachment and a PDF opened. I recognized the formal language of a legal document, but my eyes went immediately to the key paragraph. "I, Eleanor Margaret Patterson, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath my entire estate, including my residence, located at 1847 Maple Drive, and all associated assets, to my granddaughter, Nicole Marie Barnes, in recognition of her extraordinary devotion and care during my final years of life. While I love both my granddaughters equally, Nicole has earned this inheritance through 3 years of selfless service, visiting me daily, attending to my physical and emotional needs with grace and patience, and providing me with dignity in my dying." My vision blurred with tears I hadn't expected. My grandmother had seen me, had valued me, had wanted the world to know I mattered. Why wasn't this version filed? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your grandmother died suddenly 2 days after our meeting before we could have it properly witnessed and notarized. I'd planned to handle that the following week. The stroke came without warning. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Your mother's executor came to see me 3 days after the funeral. She told me she'd found a will among your grandmother's papers at home, dated about a year earlier. She filed that version with the probate court. I'd already retired at that point, was trying to hand off my remaining cases. I should have mentioned this email, should have pushed back, should have at least informed you. But I told myself it wasn't notarized, that the earlier will was valid, that it wasn't my place to interfere with an executor's decisions. She knew about this meeting, I said. I found correspondence in her things. She knew Grandma had revised the will. Then she deliberately chose to file the older version. He looked at me with sorrowful eyes. I've regretted my inaction for 5 years, Ms. Barnes. When I read that article, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Your grandmother trusted me to honour her wishes, and I failed her. But perhaps it's not too late to make it right. I sat in my car outside Mr. Thornton's house for a long time after leaving, holding the printed copy of the email he'd given me. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quiet street, and I felt a strange sense of completion settling over me. My mother didn't forge a signature. She did something smarter, more calculated. She buried the truth and let everyone believe her version of reality. Until now. I drove home in a daze, the printed email from my grandmother sitting on the passenger seat beside me like a living thing. Every few blocks I glanced at it, needing to confirm it was real, that I hadn't imagined those words. Nicole earned this through devotion, not obligation. My grandmother had seen me, had known exactly what those 3 years had meant, what they'd cost me, what they'd given her, and my mother had buried it all. When I got back to my apartment, the sun was setting, painting my living room in shades of gold and amber. I made tea that I didn't drink and sat on my couch staring at nothing, trying to process the enormity of what I now knew for certain. My mother hadn't just been thoughtlessly cruel or unconsciously biased. She'd been systematically, deliberately manipulative across multiple domains of my life for decades. My laptop was open on the coffee table, and I saw the notification of a new email. The sender name made me pause. Mark Richardson. The subject line read, "I owe you the truth." I opened it, not sure what to expect, but knowing it was probably important. "Nicole," it began, "I've been trying to write this email for 6 weeks now. I've started and deleted it a dozen times, but after seeing the article in the paper and hearing through mutual friends that you're asking questions about your family, I realised I need to tell you everything I know. Not because it changes what I did. I still left your sister at the altar, which was cowardly, regardless of the reasons, but because you deserve to understand the full picture of what your mother has been doing." I settled deeper into my couch, reading with growing recognition, as Mark described the same manipulation he told me about on the phone from Hawaii, but now with more details, more context, the clarity that comes from having 6 weeks to think through events that had seemed confusing in the moment. He wrote about the charity gala, where we'd met, about my mother approaching him a week later with an invitation to lunch that had seemed professional, but turned out to be intensely personal. About the months of carefully engineered coincidental meetings with Lauren. About the lunch where my mother had shown him a photo on her phone me, with some man at a restaurant, both of us laughing, and casually mentioned I was engaged, but keeping it private until David finished his medical residency. "I believed her completely," Mark wrote. "Why wouldn't I? She was your mother. Why would she lie about something like that? And the photo looked real. You both looked happy together." Later, after everything fell apart, I did some digging. The guy in the photo is David Martinez, who, according to his social media, is gay and married to a man named Tom. I'm guessing that dinner was a work event or something equally innocent, but your mother presented it as proof of your engagement, and I bought it completely. I closed my eyes, remembering that dinner. David was a colleague from the marketing firm 3 years ago. We'd sat together at a company dinner, and he'd made me laugh with stories about his husband Tom's disastrous attempts at home improvement. Someone had taken photos of the table. That was the photo my mother had used to convince Mark I was taken unavailable, not an option. Mark's email continued describing the night before the wedding. The overheard phone conversation the moment he realised he was about to marry someone he didn't love, because he'd been manoeuvred into it by a woman who was playing a game he hadn't even known existed. I realised in that moment, he wrote, that everything was a manipulation. I was a chess piece. Lauren was a chess piece. But you were the real target, the person your mother was trying to control by controlling everyone around you. I couldn't go through with the wedding. I couldn't build a life on that foundation of lies. The email ended with words that hit harder than I'd expected. You were always the right one, Nicole. I should have had the courage to trust that instinct instead of believing someone else's narrative about your life. I'm sorry I realised too late. I hope you find someone who sees what I saw that first night, a woman who listens, who's present, who's real in a room full of people performing. You deserved better than being erased from your own story. I hope you're writing a new chapter now. I sat with Mark's email for a long time, watching the room darken around me as the sun finished setting. I wasn't heartbroken about Mark. We barely knew each other, and whatever potential had existed between us had been theoretical at best. But I was grieving something else, the loss of possibility itself. My mother hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She hadn't just erased my achievements or positioned me as the invisible daughter. She'd reached into the realm of human connection and manipulated that too. She'd prevented what might have been a relationship because it didn't fit her plans. She'd controlled not just my past and present, but tried to control my future, my romantic possibilities, my chance at connection. The simple opportunity to be seen by someone who'd noticed me in a crowded room. The scope of it was staggering. Money, family narrative, romantic relationships. What aspect of my life had my mother not tried to control or diminish or redirect to serve her agenda? I printed Mark's email and stood by my fireplace watching the pages curl and blacken in the flames. Not out of anger at Mark, he'd been manipulated just as I had, but because I didn't need to carry his regrets along with my own losses. I burned every page except the last one, the one with his final words. That one I folded carefully and placed in the drawer, with my grandmother's letter and my father's confession. Evidence, not of legal wrongdoing, but of the systematic erasure I'd endured. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until later, was that Mark had sent a similar email to Lauren. Not the same email, but one that told her the same truths from a different angle. One that said, "Your mother lied to both of us. She told me Nicole was engaged when she wasn't. She orchestrated our entire relationship to serve some agenda neither of us understood." I didn't know that Lauren in her childhood bedroom in our parents' house was reading Mark's words with shaking hands, her world tilting as she began to question everything our mother had ever told her. I didn't know that the sister who'd been positioned as my rival was beginning to see that we'd both been victims of the same manipulation, just in different ways. I didn't know it yet, but the ground was shifting. The carefully constructed roles our mother had assigned us, the golden child, and the invisible one, the fragile one, and the strong one were beginning to crack under the weight of accumulated truth. Standing in my darkening apartment watching the last of Mark's email burn to ash, I felt something clarify inside me. This wasn't about Mark, or Lauren, or even any more about the money. This was about taking back authorship of my own life. About refusing to let my mother's manipulations define who I was or what I deserved. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me and taking back every single piece of my life they'd stolen, one truth at a time. I called my mother on Monday morning. She answered on the second ring, her voice wary. "Nicole, we need to talk," I said, keeping my voice calm, businesslike. "Just the two of us. Tomorrow at noon at your house. Make sure Dad and Lauren are out." There was a pause. "Nicole, if this is about that article, I really think It's about Grandma's will. So, I interrupted. The real one. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up before she could respond. The next day, I arrived at my parents' house at exactly noon carrying a folder thick with documents. My mother answered the door, looking older than I'd ever seen her. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled. She wore no makeup. The armour of appearance that she'd maintained my entire life had cracked, and underneath was just a tired woman in her 60s who looked afraid. "Your father took Lauren to a doctor's appointment," she said as I followed her to the kitchen. "They won't be back until 2. Good. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten 1,000 family meals, where I'd done homework while she cooked dinner, where I'd announced my college acceptance and watched her nod absently before pivoting to Lauren's concerns. Now I placed my folder between us and opened it with deliberate care. I laid out the documents one by one, like a prosecutor presenting evidence. The email from Mr. Thornton containing my grandmother's final will. The probate court records showing the older version had been filed instead. Printouts of the correspondence from Thornton's office about the final will review meeting. Photos of the documents from her safe, including my grandmother's letter, pleading with her to honour both daughters. My mother stared at the papers spread across the table. For a long moment, she said nothing. I watched her face, waiting for denial, for anger, for the elaborate justifications I'd been preparing counter-arguments against. Instead, her shoulders sagged. Her hands resting on the table trembled slightly. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes held no defiance, no calculation, just exhaustion. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Long enough," I said. "Long enough to understand exactly what you did and why you did it." She nodded slowly, looking back down at the documents. "I did it for Lauren," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to understand, Nicole. She has nothing without that house. No real skills, no inner strength like yours. You're a survivor, you always have been. You have a career, independence, resilience. She would have fallen apart with nothing. So you gave her everything instead," I said flatly, "including what Grandma explicitly wanted me to have. I thought I was protecting her, I thought—" Her voice broke. "I kept the final will from being filed. I let the old version stand. I told myself it was fair, that equal was better than recognition, that you'd be fine because you're always fine." "I'm not always fine, Mum. I've never been fine. I've just been trained not to show when I'm breaking." She closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. I'd seen my mother cry maybe 3 times in my entire life. It was disarming, but I forced myself not to soften. Not yet. "There's something I need to tell you," she said after a long moment. "Something I've never told you or Lauren. About why I did this." I waited. "My mother, your grandmother Barnes, who died before you were born, she favoured my sister Emily for everything." The words came slowly, painfully. "Emily was beautiful, charismatic, effortlessly perfect. She got the family house, the jewellery, the college fund. I got hand-me-downs and lectures about being grateful. When Emily died in a car accident at 30, I thought maybe I'd finally inherit something, some acknowledgement that I mattered too." She wiped her eyes roughly, her face twisted with old pain. "Their will said everything to Emily. If deceased, donate to charity. I got nothing, not even my mother's wedding ring that I'd admired my whole life. I was 35 years old, married with 2 children, and my parents left me nothing." I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, but understanding of a terrible pattern. "I swore that day, Hakamai," my mother continued, her voice hardening with memory, "that I would never let one of my daughters feel that pain. Never let one of you be the forgotten one, the one who didn't matter enough to be remembered in death. So when I saw that Grandma's final will left everything to you and nothing to Lauren, I saw my own history repeating. I saw Lauren being erased the way I was erased. So you erased me instead. I said. I thought I was preventing pain. I thought equal distribution was the answer. But I see now. Her voice broke completely. I just created the same pain for you that I endured. I became my mother. I became the person I hated most in the world. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of generational trauma heavy between us. I felt an unexpected stir of compassion for the girl she'd been, the daughter who'd been overlooked and then erased, even in death. But that compassion didn't erase my own pain. Mum, I said carefully, I'm sorry that happened to you. I really am. What your parents did was cruel and wrong. You deserved better. She looked up at me with something like hope in her eyes. But your pain doesn't erase mine. I continued, my voice firm. You didn't protect Lauren by hurting me. You just chose her pain over mine. And that was a choice, a deliberate choice you made every day for 5 years. You could have broken the cycle. You could have honoured Grandma's wishes while also supporting Lauren in other ways. Instead, you repeated the exact pattern of erasure that hurt you. I know, she whispered. I know that now. You stole from me, Mum. Not just money, though you did steal that. You stole recognition, acknowledgement. You stole my grandmother's final words to me, her declaration that I mattered, that what I'd done for her had value. You stole 5 years of feeling like my love and care meant something. My mother's face crumbled completely. She put her head in her hands and sobbed deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. I watched her, this woman who'd controlled every aspect of my life for 36 years, reduced to a broken thing at her kitchen table. I didn't reach for her. I didn't offer comfort. I just sat there and let her cry, let her feel the weight of what she'd done. When she finally looked up, her face blotchy and swollen, she said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." I said honestly, "I'm talking to a lawyer about my options. At minimum, I want the house that Grandma wanted me to have. But more than that, Mum, I want acknowledgement. I want you to tell Lauren the truth. I want you to tell Dad the truth, the whole truth, not the version you let him believe. I want everyone in this family to know what happened and why. That will destroy what's left of this family." "This family was built on lies," I said. "Maybe it needs to be destroyed so something real can grow in its place." My mother nodded slowly, looking down at the documents still spread across the table. "I understand." I stood up, gathering my papers back into the folder. As I reached the kitchen door, I turned back. "In trying to save Lauren from your pain, you made me live it, Mum. And now we all have to face what that choice cost us." I met with an attorney named Catherine Walsh on Monday morning. She was in her 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for handling complex estate disputes. I laid out everything: the email from Mr. Thornton, the probate records, the evidence of my caregiving, my mother's admission. Catherine listened carefully, making notes, asking pointed questions. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me. "This isn't a slam dunk case," she said frankly. "The final will wasn't notarized. Your mother, as executor, filed a valid earlier will, but the email evidence is compelling, and Mr. Thornton's testimony will carry significant weight. If he's willing to testify that your grandmother intended this as her final wishes, and if we can prove you were indeed the primary caregiver, we have a strong argument for undue influence in the opposite direction, that your mother suppressed the decedent's clear intent." "How long would it take?" 4 to 6 months, potentially. Maybe longer if your mother fights it aggressively. I nodded slowly. "I want to proceed." "Ms. Barnes, I have to ask, the house is worth about $450,000, which is substantial, but you've told me you have a stable career. Is this really about the money?" "No," I said. "It's about acknowledgement. It's about my grandmother wanting the world to know I mattered, that my care mattered, and my mother stealing that recognition. I need it back." Catherine smiled slightly. "That's the best reason to pursue this case. We'll file the petition this week. I left her office feeling something settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, but purpose. Direction. The sense that I was finally doing what needed to be done. What I didn't know was that while I was meeting with my attorney, my sister was having her own reckoning. I got the call from my father at 2 p.m. His voice was strained, barely controlled. "Nicole, you need to come home. Now. Lauren found something. It's bad. Please, come." I drove to my parents' house with a knot in my stomach, not sure what to expect. When I walked in, I heard shouting from the living room. Lauren's voice high and furious in a way I'd never heard before. I found them all there, my mother seated on the couch, looking shell-shocked, my father standing by the window and Lauren pacing in the middle of the room, her laptop clutched in one hand. Lauren whirled when I entered. Her face was blotchy, her eyes red, but there was a wildness in her expression I'd never seen. Not grief exactly, but fury mixed with betrayal. "Did you know about this?" she demanded, thrusting her laptop toward me. I looked at the screen. Mark's email to Lauren was open, and I could see enough of it to understand what had happened. "He sent me a different version," I said quietly. "Yes, I knew Mum manipulated him. I've known for weeks." "And you didn't tell me?" Her voice cracked. "Would you have believed me a month ago? Would you have listened?" She stared at me, then slowly lowered the laptop. "No," she admitted. "I wouldn't have." She turned to our mother, who sat frozen on the couch. "Did you manipulate Mark into dating me? Did you lie to him about Nicole being engaged? Did you orchestrate our entire relationship?" My mother opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Finally, she whispered, "I was trying to help you find happiness." "By lying!" Lauren's voice rose to a shout. "By manipulating. By using Mark like a puppet and me like a prize to be won. I loved him. Mum. Or at least, I thought I did. And none of it was real. None of it was mine. It was all your construction. Lauren, please?" "No." Lauren slammed her laptop closed. "Nicole tried to tell me at the dinner. The article said something was wrong with the will, but I didn't want to see it because I didn't want to believe my own mother would..." Her voice broke completely. "You destroyed Nicole for money, for a house. I don't even want that fucking house. I never asked you to do any of this." She was crying now, but it wasn't the fragile crying I'd watched for weeks after the wedding. This was different, raw, angry, the crying of someone who'd just discovered the ground beneath her feet had never been solid. "You made me the excuse for your cruelty," Lauren said, her voice dropping to something more dangerous than shouting. "Every time you hurt Nicole, every time you erased her or dismissed her or manipulated her life, you did it for me, to protect me, to give me what I needed. You made me the reason, and I didn't even know it. I didn't even ask for it." My mother was crying now too, but it was helpless without the control she usually maintained, even in emotional moments. "I thought I was protecting you." "No." My father's voice cut through the room. We all turned to look at him. He'd been silent through the entire exchange, standing by the window with his back to us. Now he turned around and his face looked older than I'd ever seen it. "No, Margaret, you weren't protecting Lauren. We need to stop pretending that's what this was." He walked to the center of the room, positioning himself between his daughters and his wife. "I told you this would happen," he said to my mother. "I told you 20 years ago that you were breaking Nicole to build up Lauren. I told you it was wrong. Do you remember that night after Nicole's 16th birthday, when you turned her party into Lauren's celebration? I told you then." "And what did you say?" My mother said nothing. "You said Lauren needs the spotlight. Nicole is strong enough to share, and I let you say it. I let you keep saying it for 20 years. He turned to me, his face crumbling. "I failed you, Nicole. I was weak when you needed strength. I chose peace over justice. I chose my comfort over your protection." I looked at my father and felt the weight of his confession settle over the room. "You're right," I said quietly. "You did fail me. And I don't know if I can forgive that." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I know." My mother was barely holding herself together now, her hands shaking, her breathing uneven. This wasn't the controlled woman who'd managed every family narrative for 40 years. This was someone whose entire identity had collapsed. "I was trying to protect this family," she whispered. Lauren laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You were protecting yourself, Mum. From your own pain, your own history. You were so afraid of feeling what your mother made you feel that you made Nicole feel it instead. And you called it love. You called it protection. You called it doing what's best for the family. But it was just fear, and cruelty, and selfishness." My mother looked from Lauren to me as if seeking some lifeline, some way back to the control she'd always maintained. But there was nothing. Both her daughters were looking at her with eyes that finally saw her clearly, and what we saw wasn't the powerful matriarch, but a damaged woman who damaged everyone around her. "I'm filing a legal petition to recognise Grandma's real will," I said, shared into the silence. "My attorney is submitting the paperwork this week. I'm taking back what you stole." "Nicole," my mother started. "No," I said. "You don't get to argue this. You don't get to manipulate this. It's done." Lauren looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something I'd never seen before: alliance, understanding. The recognition that we'd both been victims of the same woman's manipulation, just in different ways. The lie Mum built to protect Lauren shattered Lauren's love for her. And in the wreckage, our family finally broke into its truest pieces. Catherine filed the petition 3 days after the family confrontation. The legal document was dense with terminology I barely understood: testamentary intent, undue influence, fraudulent suppression of probate documents. But the essence was simple. My grandmother had wanted me to have her house, and Assets had expressed this clearly to her attorney via email 1 week before her death, and my mother had deliberately filed an older version of the will that contradicted those wishes. The court process was nothing like television dramas. It was tedious, bureaucratic, and achingly slow. Catherine had warned me it would take months, but I hadn't fully understood what that meant until I was living through it. Weeks of waiting for responses to motions, days spent in depositions answering the same questions from different angles, hours of reviewing documents and preparing testimony. My mother hired an attorney, Harold Preston, a man in his 60s with a reputation for defending complicated estate cases. His strategy was to argue that without a properly notarized final will, the court should respect the version that had been legally filed and accepted 5 years ago. He painted my mother not as malicious, but as confused, overwhelmed by grief, doing her best to honour what she believed were her mother's wishes. It was a reasonable argument. It might even have worked if not for Mr. Thornton. James Thornton testified in month 2, appearing in court with the careful dignity of someone who'd spent decades in legal proceedings. He described my grandmother's clarity about her intentions, the specific instructions she'd given about recognising Nicole's caregiving, the email she'd sent, ensuring her wishes were documented even if something happened before the formal signing. "Mrs. Patterson was quite explicit," he said from the witness stand, his voice steady and clear. "She wanted Nicole to have the house because Nicole had earned it through devotion. Those were her words, earned it through devotion. She was concerned that an equal split would fail to acknowledge the profound difference in care the 2 granddaughters had provided." My mother's attorney cross-examined him, trying to establish that the email wasn't legally binding, that elderly people often changed their minds, that grief and illness could cloud judgment. But Mr. Thornton was unshakable. He'd been practicing law for 40 years. He knew a client's clear intent when he saw it. What I hadn't expected, what shifted everything, happened during month 2 of the proceedings. Lauren called Catherine's office and requested a meeting. I was surprised when Catherine told me more surprised when Lauren showed up with her own attorney, a young woman named Rebecca Chen, who specialised in estate law. "I want to renounce my claim to Grandma's estate," Lauren said without preamble, placing a document on Catherine's desk. Rebecca helped me draft this. It's a formal renunciation of inheritance. I'm voluntarily giving up any interest in Grandma's property or assets. I stared at her. Lauren, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She met my eyes and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Not the fragility Mother had cultivated, but actual strength, hard-won and genuine. It was never mine, Nicole. Grandma wanted you to have it. She said so explicitly. Mum twisted that to fit her agenda, and I didn't know, but now I do. So I'm making this right. This would eliminate any argument that you're fighting Lauren for the inheritance, Catherine explained. It makes the case purely about honouring your grandmother's documented wishes versus your mother's suppression of those wishes. Lauren signed the document in front of a notary, her signature careful and deliberate. When she finished, she looked at me and said, I need you to know I'm on your side now. Not Mum's, yours. I should have been all along. I felt something crack in my chest, not breaking, but opening. Thank you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it, she whispered. I'm sorry for everything. Rebecca filed the renunciation with the court that afternoon. The effect was immediate and profound. My mother's attorney's argument shifted from both granddaughters deserve consideration to a weaker position about executor discretion and good faith mistakes. The proceedings dragged on. Month 3 brought forensic analysis of the email evidence. Month 4 brought final arguments and deliberation. Through it all, my mother sat in the courtroom looking diminished older, as if the legal process was physically eroding her. My father sat beside her, but there was a distance between them that spoke of its own kind of fracture. Catherine asked me privately during a recess in month 3, if we win, do you want to pursue criminal charges? Document fraud by an executor is a felony. So is fraudulent suppression of a will. I thought about it for a long time sitting in the courthouse hallway while people streamed past. No, I finally said. Losing both her daughters is punishment enough. I want the house and the acknowledgement that Grandma wanted me to have it. But I don't want to put her in prison. I just want the truth recognised. Catherine nodded. That's gracious of you. It's not grace, I said. It's exhaustion. The final ruling came on a Tuesday afternoon in the 4th month. The courtroom was nearly empty, just our immediate family, the attorneys, and a court reporter. The judge was a woman in her 50s, named Patricia Morrison, who'd presided over the case with careful attention to detail. Having reviewed all evidence, she said, including the email correspondence between Miss Patterson and her attorney, the testimony of Mr. Thornton, the documented pattern of care provided by Nicole Barnes, and the forensic analysis of the documents in question, this court finds clear and convincing evidence that the email dated May 23rd represented Eleanor Patterson's true testamentary intent. The will, filed for probate, dated April 15th of the previous year, does not reflect the decedent's final wishes. Therefore, this court rules that the estate, including the property located at 1847 Maple Drive, and all remaining assets valued at approximately $450,000, shall be distributed to Nicole Marie Barnes in accordance with the decedent's documented final intent. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. I sat there hearing the words, but not quite feeling them. I'd won. After 4 months of legal battle, after 36 years of being erased, after 5 years of believing a lie, I'd won. The house was mine. The acknowledgement was mine. The recognition that my grandmother had seen me, had valued me, had wanted the world to know I mattered, all of it, was finally legally mine. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, emptied out by months of fighting, of dredging up every painful memory, of forcing my family to confront truths they'd spent decades burying. I looked across the courtroom at my mother. She was staring straight ahead, her face completely blank, her hands folded in her lap with unnatural stillness. My father had his hand on her shoulder, but she didn't seem to notice. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, diminished, not just physically, but existentially, a woman who'd built her entire identity on control, and had watched it all crumble in a public courtroom. I won the house. But looking at my mother's hollow eyes across the courtroom, I wondered, had I lost something bigger than money, I spent a month after the court ruling avoiding the house. I signed the papers that made it legally mine, met with financial advisors who helped me understand what inheriting $450,000 in assets actually meant, and tried to feel something other than exhausted numbness. My parents had been calling. First my father leaving gentle voicemails asking if we could talk. Then my mother, her messages growing increasingly desperate. I didn't return any of them. I needed space to figure out what I actually wanted beyond the legal victory I'd already achieved. Lauren and I had coffee twice during that month. Our conversations were careful still about feeling out the boundaries of a relationship that had been broken for so long we weren't sure how to rebuild it. But there was something real growing between us, not the forced sisterhood Mother had tried to construct, but something authentic built on shared recognition of the damage we'd both endured. It was Lauren who finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What are you going to do about the house?" "I don't know," I admitted. "They're still living there. I have every right to evict them. But I'm not sure that's what Grandma would have wanted." "What do you want?" I thought about it for a long time, stirring my coffee absently. I want accountability. Real accountability. Not just in a courtroom, but in front of the people who watched this happen for years and said nothing. Lauren nodded slowly. "So, what does that look like?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think I'm starting to figure it out." 2 weeks later, I drove to my grandmother's house, my house now, for the first time since the ruling. My mother answered the door, looking wary, her face drawn with exhaustion that matched my own. "Nicole," she said, "I didn't know you were coming. Can I come in?" She stepped aside and I walked into the living room that still smelled faintly of my grandmother's lavender sachets, though it had been 5 years since she died. My father was sitting in the armchair, and he stood up when I entered, his expression cautiously hopeful. "I've made a decision about the house," I said without preamble. "You can stay here. I'm not going to evict you or make you homeless." My mother's face flooded with relief. "Nicole, thank you. Thank you so much. I know we don't deserve—" "There's a condition," I interrupted. The relief faltered. "What condition? I'm organising a family gathering. Everyone, Aunt Carol, Uncle Jim, the cousins, close family friends, about 25 people, and you're going to tell them the truth." My mother went very pale. "The truth about what?" "Everything. The will you suppressed, the manipulation with Mark, the decades of favouritism, all of it. In front of everyone who watched it happen and said nothing. You're going to stand up and tell the truth." "Nicole, I can't. Then you need to find somewhere else to live." My voice was calm, factual. "This is my house now. Grandma wanted me to have it. If you want to stay, this is the price. Public accountability. Not a private apology I can't verify. Not promises to do better. Not explanations about your pain. Just the truth witnessed by the people who need to hear it." My father spoke for the first time. "Nicole, sweetheart, your mother has been through so much already. So have I, Dad, for 36 years. And nobody demanded public accountability from her for any of it, until now." I looked at my mother. "You have 1 week to decide. The gathering is next Sunday at 2. If you're not there, or if you don't tell the truth, I'll start eviction proceedings Monday morning." I left before either of them could respond. The week passed slowly. I sent invitations to the family gathering, carefully worded, to make it sound like a family meeting to discuss recent events and move forward together. Most people accepted, probably out of curiosity as much as anything else. My mother called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. In the first, she begged me to reconsider. In the second, she simply said, "I'll be there." Sunday afternoon arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. I arrived at the house early to set up chairs in the living room, enough for everyone I'd invited. People began arriving at 1:30, filling the space, with uncertain chatter and curious glances. No one quite knew why they'd been summoned, but everyone had theories. At exactly 2:00, with 23 people seated and waiting, my mother walked into the room. She was dressed simply, her hair pulled back, her face free of makeup. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by what she was about to do. She stood in front of the fireplace, her hands trembling as she held a piece of paper covered in her handwriting. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. "I've asked you here because I need to tell you some things I should have said years ago, things I've been hiding because I was ashamed." She looked down at her notes, and I saw her hand shake harder. For a moment, I thought she might not be able to do it. Then she took a breath and began reading. 5 years ago, my mother revised her will to leave her house and assets to Nicole, in recognition of the 3 years Nicole spent caring for her while she was dying. I knew about this will, I was told about it, but I suppressed it and filed an older version instead because I was afraid of what it meant that one daughter had earned something the other hadn't. I thought I was protecting Lauren, but I was really protecting myself from repeating my own painful history. The room was utterly silent. People shifted uncomfortably, but no one interrupted. I manipulated Mark Richardson into dating Lauren by lying about Nicole being engaged. I showed him a doctored photo and constructed an elaborate story because I wanted to control who ended up with whom in this family. Her voice broke. I've spent decades positioning Lauren as fragile and Nicole as strong, not because that's who they were, but because it gave me an excuse to give Lauren more and demand more from Nicole. She looked up from her notes, tears streaming down her face. I hurt my daughters because I was hurt by my own mother. I thought I was preventing pain, but I was just redistributing it, making Nicole carry what I couldn't bear to carry myself. And I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. Some people in the room were crying. Others looked away, unable to witness the raw vulnerability of Margaret Barnes, stripped of all pretense. Aunt Carol had her hand over her mouth. Uncle Jim stared at the floor. I sat in my chair and watched my mother crack open in front of everyone who'd ever watched her control our family's narrative. I didn't cry. I didn't reach for her. I just witnessed the way others had witnessed my erasure for years without intervening. When my mother finished, she looked at me with desperate, hollow eyes. I stood up and walked to where she was standing. For a moment, we just looked at each other. "Thank you for telling the truth," I said quietly. Then I turned and walked out of the room, through the kitchen, out the back door, into the garden, where Lauren and I had played as children. I heard footsteps behind me a few minutes later and knew, without looking, that it was Lauren. She sat beside me on the old stone bench. Neither of us spoke for a long time, just sat together in the slanting afternoon sunlight, listening to the confused voices drifting from inside the house. "That took courage," Lauren finally said. "What you did in there." "It wasn't courage," I replied. "It was necessity. Secrets were killing all of us. Someone had to drag them into the light." "Still," she said softly, "it was brave." We sat together as the sun moved lower in the sky, two sisters who'd been kept apart by manipulation and favoritism, now trying to figure out who we were without the roles our mother had written for us. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the first brick towards something I'd lost for years, a foundation built on truth instead of silence. I put the house on the market in early month 6. The decision came to me one evening while sitting in my grandmother's old bedroom. My bedroom now legally surrounded by memories that felt more like ghosts than comfort. Every room held decades of family dinners and holidays, but also the weight of every time I'd been cropped out of photos, every achievement dismissed, every moment I'd been made invisible within these walls. I called my parents before listing it. "I'm selling the house," I told them. "You have 90 days to find a new place. I'll help you with the deposit on an apartment, but you can't stay here." There was a long silence. Finally, my father said, That's fair, sweetheart. We understand. My mother said nothing, but I heard her crying in the background. I worked with a realtor who specialised in estate sales. She walked through the house with professional appreciation, noting the original hardwood floors, the updated kitchen, the mature landscaping. In this market, you're looking at about $450,000, maybe more if we get multiple offers. The house sold in 3 weeks. A young couple with 2 small children, the wife pregnant with their third. They toured it on a Saturday morning and I watched them imagine their life in these rooms, birthday parties in the backyard, Christmas mornings in the living room. Ordinary happy moments that had eluded my family. I was glad it would be them. While the sale was in escrow, I met with Catherine Walsh again. Not about legal battles this time, but about creating something new. I want to establish a non-profit, I told her, a foundation dedicated to helping women who've been financially manipulated by family members. Legal aid for inheritance disputes, therapy services for those dealing with family trauma, financial literacy education so women know their rights. Catherine listened carefully, then smiled. That's ambitious. Also expensive. You're looking at significant startup costs, ongoing operational expenses, legal compliance. Do you have funding in mind? All of it. I said, every dollar from selling the house, $450,000 to start. I'll fundraise for operational costs once we're established. That's your entire inheritance. I know, but keeping the money feels like keeping the pain. This way maybe the pain becomes something useful. We spent weeks on paperwork, articles of incorporation, 501c3 application, mission statements, bylaws. I drafted and redrafted the foundation's mission until it felt true. For every woman told she wasn't enough. For every inheritance stolen by silence. For every second daughter who refused to stay invisible. I registered the name officially, the Second Daughters Foundation. Then I called Lauren. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory, where we'd been rebuilding our relationship one careful conversation at a time. I'd brought the founding documents with me and I spread them across the table between us. I'm starting this, us, I said, and I'd like you to be co-founder. Lauren looked at the papers, her expression unreadable. Why me? Because you understand what it's like to be both the favourite and the prisoner. You know how it feels to be positioned as fragile, to be used as justification for someone else's cruelty. You can speak to the other side of this story, the side I can't speak to. You don't have to offer this out of obligation, she said quietly. I know I don't deserve. I'm not offering out of obligation. I'm offering because I think we can do something real together, something that matters. I met her eyes, but I need to know you're serious. This isn't about redemption or making yourself feel better. It's hard work for women nobody else cares about. Lauren was silent for a long moment, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Then she nodded. I want to make this right, not just for you, but for every woman who was told she wasn't pretty enough, smart enough, worthy enough to inherit what should have been hers. I've been both the favourite and the prisoner, and I understand now neither position was real. Both were ways of controlling us. She looked up. I'm in? Completely in. We launched the Second Daughters Foundation 3 months later, in month 8. Lauren and I had spent those months setting up office space in a modest building downtown, hiring a part-time administrative assistant, building a website, and connecting with lawyers willing to do pro bono work for our clients. The launch got covered by the local paper, a full-page article titled, From Family Scandal to Social Impact, Nicole Barnes Turns Inheritance Battle into Mission. The reporter interviewed both Lauren and me, and for the first time in our lives, we told our story together, not as rivals, but as allies who'd survived the same system of manipulation. The response was overwhelming. Within the first week, 17 women reached out sharing their own stories of being the overlooked daughter, the one who did all the caregiving but inherited nothing, the one whose achievements were dismissed while their siblings' mediocrity was celebrated. Each story was different in its details, but similar in its essence. Systematic erasure wrapped in the language of family love. Donations began arriving. Small amounts, mostly $20 here, $50 there, but they added up. Women who'd fought their own inheritance battles sent what they could. One woman in her 70s sent $500 with a note, "I lost my fight at 40 years ago. Help someone else win theirs." A local women's business association invited me to speak at their monthly luncheon. I stood at a podium in front of 80 women and told them the truth. I was invisible in my own family for 36 years. I was told I was simple but dependable, strong enough not to need support, good enough to carry everyone else's burdens, but not valuable enough to be celebrated when I succeeded. And I believed that narrative for so long, I forgot to question it. The room was absolutely silent. But something happened when I finally refused to stay invisible. I learned that the people who benefit from your invisibility will fight very hard to keep you there. They'll call it love. They'll call it protection. They'll say they're doing what's best for the family. But what they're really doing is asking you to stay small so they can stay comfortable. After the speech, women lined up to talk to me. Some were crying, some were angry, some just wanted to say, "Thank you for putting words to what I've lived." Lauren stood at the back of the room watching. When I finally made it through the line, she hugged me, a real hug, not the perfunctory embrace of obligation. "You were amazing." "We said, "Why amazing?" she said. "We were amazing," I corrected. "This is ours now, both of ours." Over the following months, the Second Daughters Foundation became something real, something that existed beyond my personal story. We helped women file inheritance disputes. We connected them with therapists who understood family trauma. We taught financial literacy classes in community centres. Slowly, my identity in the community shifted. I was no longer the overlooked daughter or the one from that family drama. I was becoming the woman who turned pain into purpose, the founder of that foundation that helps women. And I realised something profound. I'd spent 36 years needing my family to see me, to acknowledge my worth, to validate my existence. But in building something meaningful, from the wreckage of that need, I'd learned to see myself, to know my own worth, to validate my own existence. They finally saw me, but by then, I'd already learned to see myself, and that I realised was worth more than any inheritance. I invited them on a Tuesday evening in late month 10. The invitation was simple, sent via text to all three of them in a group message: "Dinner at my place this Saturday, 6 p.m, just us, please, come." Lauren responded first, "I'll be there." My father replied an hour later, "Thank you for inviting us. We'll be there." My mother's response came that night just before I went to bed. "Yes, thank you." I spent Saturday afternoon cooking my grandmother's pot roast, the recipe I'd watched her make dozens of times during those 3 years I'd cared for her. The smell filled my apartment with memory, not all of it painful though, much of it was complicated. I set my small table for 4 using the good dishes I rarely touched and opened a bottle of wine to let it breathe. They arrived together at 6 sharp. My father had driven them, and they stood at my door looking uncertain, as if they weren't sure of the rules for this gathering. My mother looked older than I remembered, her hair more grey, her face lined with exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. We settled around the table with the awkwardness of people who'd once been family but weren't sure what they were now. I served the pot roast, and for several minutes the only sound was silverware against plates. Finally, Lauren spoke. "This is Grandma's recipe." "It is," I confirmed. "That's appropriate," my mother said quietly. "She's why we're here in a way. She started the truth-telling." We ate slowly, carefully, and gradually conversation began to flow. Small talk at first, safe topics about the weather and the foundation's work, and my father's retirement plans. But I could feel the weight of everything unspoken pressing down on us, and I knew we couldn't stay in safe territory forever. "Mum," I said, setting down my fork, "you mentioned once that your mother favoured your sister. I'd like to hear that story. The whole story, if you're willing." My mother looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. She set down her own fork and folded her hands in her lap, her voice quiet but steady as she began. "My mother told me when I was 10 years old that I was the plain one. Those were her exact words. She said it almost casually, as if it was simply a fact we all had to accept. My sister, Emily, was beautiful, vivacious, magnetic. She got the attention, the praise, the opportunities. I got overlooked." She paused, her hands tightening in her lap. "When we were adults, my parents gave Emily the family house while she was still alive. They said she needed it more, that I was more practical and would be fine without it. They gave her our grandmother's jewellery. They paid for her elaborate wedding while mine was modest and small. They made it clear in 1,000 small ways that Emily was the daughter who mattered." I watched my mother's face as she spoke, seeing pain I'd never fully understood before. "When Emily died in a car accident at 30, I thought maybe I'd finally inherit something, some acknowledgement that I'd mattered too, that I'd been a good daughter, even if I wasn't the special one." Her voice cracked. "Her will said everything to charity. My parents upheld it. I got nothing, not even a photograph from her funeral. I was 35 years old, married with 2 young daughters, and my parents left me with nothing." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I swore that day I would never let one of my daughters feel that pain. I swore I'd never let one of you be the nothing daughter." She paused, seemed to lose her train of thought, then said again, "I swore I'd never let one of you be nothing." I noticed the repetition, the slight confusion in her eyes as she tried to remember what she'd just said. Something flickered in my chest, concern maybe, but I let her continue. "But I see now that I just chose which daughter would be nothing. I made you the forgotten one, Nicole, trying to prevent Lauren from being what I'd been. I became my mother. I became the person who hurt me most." My father had been silent through all of this, but now he set down his fork with careful precision. "I failed you too, Nicole," he said, his voice rough. "In a different way than your mother did, but just as completely." He looked at his hands, weathered and age-spotted, and continued. "I saw everything. I knew it was wrong. But I told myself Margaret had been hurt, that she had her reasons. I told myself Lauren seemed fragile, and you seemed strong enough to handle it. I made your strength an excuse for my cowardice." He finally looked up at me. "I was raised to believe peace was more important than justice, that keeping the family calm was worth any personal sacrifice. But I was wrong. Peace built on injustice isn't peace, it's complicity. And I chose complicity for 36 years. The room was very quiet. Lauren reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of their confessions, the complicated truth that they'd both hurt me while themselves being hurt, that pain generates pain in patterns that repeat across generations, unless someone deliberately breaks the cycle. "I understand now that hurt people," I said carefully. "That doesn't make what you did okay, but it makes it human. It makes it possible to understand without excusing." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'm not going to carry your pain anymore. It's yours to heal, yours to process, yours to make peace with. But I'm also not going to pretend we can just move past this. We can't go around the truth. We have to walk through it. And that means acknowledging that I was broken by what you did. I was erased, dismissed, manipulated, and controlled. For 36 years. We know," my father whispered. "We know that now. The question is what we do with that knowledge," I continued. I've built something meaningful from the wreckage. I've learnt to see myself when you couldn't see me. I found purpose in helping other women who were erased the way I was. That's my path forward. What about us? My mother asked. Is there a path forward for us? I looked at both my parents, these flawed people who'd damaged me so profoundly while themselves carrying damage they'd never healed. I don't know yet, I admitted, but I know this is a start. Truth instead of pretense, accountability instead of excuses, seeing each other as we actually are instead of the roles we were assigned. My mother nodded slowly. I can work with that. We finished dinner in a different kind of silence than we'd started with, not comfortable, but honest. When they stood to leave, my mother hugged me. It was brief, uncertain, but real. After they left, Lauren stayed to help with dishes. We worked side by side in my small kitchen, and she said, "That was brave of them. Finally." "It was necessary," I replied. "Not brave, just necessary." It wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. And for the first time, my parents saw me not as the strong one or the simple one, but as their daughter who'd been breaking quietly for 36 years. I found the house on a Tuesday in early year 1, almost exactly 12 months after the wedding that had never happened, but had changed everything anyway. It was a small bungalow on a tree-lined street across town, far enough from my parents' neighbourhood to feel like genuinely new territory. The house had good bones, as the realtor said, original hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, a front porch with enough room for a swing. But what sold me was the light. Every room had large windows, and the morning sun streamed through them in a way that made everything feel possible. I bought it with my own money savings from years of steady work in marketing money I'd earned through my own efforts. No inheritance, no family assistance, just mine. Moving in took 2 weeks. I painted the walls in colours my mother would have considered too bold, a deep teal in the living room, warm gold in the kitchen. I bought furniture that suited my taste rather than trying to match some imagined standard of what looked appropriate. Eclectic, Karen called it when she helped me arrange things. I called it honest. On the living room wall, in a prominent spot where I'd see it every day, I hung a framed photograph of Mrs. Edith. I'd found it among her things. After she died, her family had given it to me, knowing we'd been close. Beneath the photo, I'd had her favourite quote, engraved on a small plaque: "Kindness is fragile, but it's worth protecting." The house felt like an exhale after holding my breath for 37 years. One evening, after I'd been settled for about a week, I sat at my new kitchen table, a vintage piece I'd found at an estate sale, solid oak, with decades of character worn into its surface, and pulled out stationery. I'd bought nice paper specifically for this, cream-coloured with a subtle texture, because this letter deserved to be written properly. I uncapped my pen and began, "Lauren, I forgive you not because you earned it, but because I need to be free. You were a victim too. Mum's love was conditional for both of us. She made you the pretty one, and me the strong one. And we both suffocated under those labels. I don't want to carry anger anymore. It's too heavy, and I'm tired of carrying things that don't belong to me. Let's be sisters again, not perfect, not like some Instagram version of what sisterhood should look like, but real, messy and honest and real. Come visit my new house when you're ready. I'll make tea. Nicole." I mailed it the next morning, dropping it in the blue mailbox on the corner, and feeling something loosen in my chest as I walked away. 3 days later, on Saturday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Lauren standing on my porch, holding my letter in one hand, tears streaming down her face. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course." She walked into my living room and stood there for a moment, taking in the teal walls, the mismatched furniture, the framed photo of Mrs. Edith. Then she turned to me and said, "I'm learning to stand on my own." "Sure, I can see that." "I enrolled in community college, graphic design. I start next month." She wiped her eyes. "And I got a part-time job at the bookstore on Main Street. It doesn't pay much, but it's mine. Nobody got it for me or manipulated anyone into hiring me. I just applied and got it. That's wonderful, Lauren. And I'm seeing a therapist. Twice a week. She laughed a watery sound. I have so much to unpack. Decades of being told I was fragile, that I needed protection, that my value came from being pretty and charming. I'm trying to figure out who I am underneath all that programming. I stepped forward and opened my arms. Lauren walked into them, and we held each other on my porch in the afternoon sunlight. It was the first embrace we'd shared in years that felt genuinely real, not performed for family, not obligatory, just two sisters who'd survived the same storm and were learning to build something new from the wreckage. When we pulled apart, I said, "Want to take a walk? I'm still learning the neighbourhood." "I'd like that." We walked slowly through streets I was only beginning to know past houses, with gardens already blooming despite it being early spring. Lauren pointed out a Victorian with elaborate flower beds. "That's beautiful. Do you think your garden—" "Maybe," I said. "I've never tried before, but this feels like the right time to start trying things I've never done." We turned down a side street where children were playing in front yards, their laughter floating on the warm breeze. Lauren told me about her classes, her nervousness about being the oldest student in most of them, her excitement about learning something purely because she wanted to learn it. I told her about the foundation, about a woman we'd helped last week, who'd been written out of her father's will despite caring for him for 5 years. We connected her with a lawyer, and she's filing a petition. She cried when I told her we'd cover the legal fees. "You're doing something really important," Lauren said. "I'm proud of you. I should have said that before." "You're saying it now. That's what matters." We circled back toward my house, the conversation flowing more easily than it ever had before. We laughed over a memory from childhood, the time we tried to bake cookies for Mother's birthday, and had somehow set off the smoke alarm, filling the house with burnt sugar smoke. At the time, Mother had been furious, but now, divorced from that context, it was just funny. Two kids trying their best and failing spectacularly. "Do you remember what she said?" Lauren asked, giggling. "She said, 'Well, at least you girls can work together when properly motivated.'" Even then, she was managing the narrative. I said, but without bitterness. Just observation. We reached my porch and sat on the steps together, neither of us ready to say goodbye yet. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. "Thank you for the letter," Lauren said quietly. "Thank you for not giving up on the possibility of us." "Thank you for showing up," I replied, "for doing the work to become someone I could have a real relationship with." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighbourhood settle into evening. A couple walked by with their dog. Someone a few houses down was grilling, the smell of charcoal and barbecue drifting on the air. And, for the first time in our lives, silence between us felt safe, not like a threat or a weapon, but like peace. The package appeared on my desk on a Wednesday afternoon in late year 1.5, about 18 months after the wedding that had set everything in motion. I'd been in meetings all morning, and when I returned to my office there, it was a large, flat package wrapped in brown paper, my name written across the front in handwriting I recognised immediately as Lauren's. There was no return address, no note on the outside, just my name in her careful script. I stood there for a moment, my hand on my office door, staring at it. Lauren and I had been building something real over the past 6 months, something that felt sturdy and honest in a way our relationship had never been before. But we hadn't exchanged gifts. We deliberately kept things simple, rebuilding from the ground up without the weight of obligation or performance. I closed my office door and carefully cut through the packing tape. When I pulled back the brown paper, I stopped breathing. It was a painting. My painting. The one I'd spent 3 weeks creating for Lauren's wedding. The oil portrait of 2 little girls standing together in our grandmother's garden, holding hands, faces full of the uncomplicated trust that exists before the world teaches you who's supposed to matter more. The painting I'd packaged so carefully and sent with a card that said, "To my sister, may you find what you're looking for. The painting Lauren had sold on Facebook Marketplace for $50 without even opening the package. But it wasn't just the painting. Someone had taken it to a professional restorer. The colours were more vibrant than I remembered. The damaged edges, from years in someone else's possession, had been carefully repaired. It had been reframed in beautiful cherry wood that complemented the warm tones of the garden scene. And at the bottom of the frame, someone had added a small brass plaque engraved with words that made my throat tight. 2 sisters, 1 garden. Love, never wasted, only delayed. My hands were shaking as I found the envelope taped to the back of the frame. I sat down at my desk and opened it carefully, pulling out several pages of Lauren's handwriting. "Nicole," it began. "I tracked down the person who bought this painting from me on Facebook Marketplace. Her name is Sandra, and she's a lovely woman in her 60s who bought it because she thought the image was beautiful, even though she knew nothing about who painted it or why. I found her by going through every person who'd commented on or shared my original listing. It took me 3 months. I asked if I could buy it back. She said yes, but she'd grown attached to it, so the price was $400. I paid it gladly. Then, I took it to an art restoration specialist who spent 2 months repairing the damage it had sustained and giving it the care it should have received from the beginning. Nicole, I can't undo the hurt I caused when I sold your heart for $50 without even looking at it. I can't take back the cruelty of that rejection, the message it sent, about how little I valued your love, your effort, your art. But I can acknowledge it. I can stand in the full truth of what I did and say I was cruel. I was blind. I was so trapped in the role Mum had written for me that I couldn't see what you were offering. Not just a painting, but yourself. Your love, your hope that we could be real sisters. This painting belongs with us, with you, because you painted the truth. 2 sisters who loved each other once before. We were taught to compete before we were assigned roles that pitted us against each other. You painted the possibility that we could love each other again. I'm giving it back not to ease my guilt, but to show you that I see it now. I see what you tried to give me then. And I see what you've given me since: patience, grace, or the opportunity to become someone worth being your sister. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for believing we could become something real. Your sister, Lauren." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face by the end of the first reading, but continuing through the second and third, because I needed to absorb every word, needed to feel the full weight of what Lauren had done. This wasn't a quick apology or an easy gesture. She'd spent 3 months tracking down a stranger who'd bought a painting from a Facebook listing. She'd paid 8 times what she'd originally sold it for. She'd invested time and money and effort, not because she had to, but because she wanted to make something right that could never be fully made right, wanted to demonstrate through action rather than just words that she understood the depth of what she'd done. That weekend, I hung the painting in my hallway, the space between my living room and bedroom, where I'd see it every morning when I woke up and every evening when I came home. I took my time choosing the exact spot, making sure it was centered, making sure the light hit it right. When it was finally up, I stood back and looked at those 2 little girls, Lauren and me, maybe 7 and 5, in a garden that no longer existed in a moment before everything got complicated. But it wasn't a painful image anymore. It wasn't a reminder of what we'd lost or what had been taken from us. It was proof that people could change, that relationships could be torn apart and deliberately, painstakingly rebuilt, that sisters who'd been positioned as rivals could choose to become allies, friends, could choose each other despite everything that had tried to keep them apart. I took a photo of the painting hanging in my hallway and texted it to Lauren with only 2 words: "Welcome home." She replied 3 minutes later, "Does this mean I can visit any time?" "It means you're always welcome here. You don't need an invitation anymore." That evening, she came over with Thai takeout and a bottle of wine, and we sat in my living room eating pad Thai and laughing about something ridiculous that had happened at the foundation office that week. Every time I walked past the painting to get more wine or clear plates, I glanced at it, those two girls in the garden, frozen in a moment of pure, uncomplicated sisterhood. I'd painted that picture of who we were. Lauren gave it back to show me who we could become. And that was worth more than anything I'd lost. The sign started subtly about a year after Lauren gave me back the painting. My mother would repeat questions at family dinners, asking me the same thing about the foundation twice in 10 minutes. She'd lose track of conversations mid-sentence, her eyes going distant as she searched for words that used to come easily. We dismissed it at first as normal aging, the small forgetting that comes with being in your 60s. But over the following months, the episodes became harder to ignore. My father called me one evening, his voice tight with worry, to tell me that Mother had gotten lost driving home from the grocery store, a route she'd driven for 30 years. She'd called him in tears, confused about where she was, unable to recognise familiar landmarks. The diagnosis came 6 months later, early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The neurologist was careful to explain that stress doesn't cause Alzheimer's. The disease has complex genetic and biological roots, but the emotional upheaval of the past few years might have made existing symptoms more noticeable, or perhaps the stress had simply coincided with the disease's natural progression. Lauren and I sat with my father in his living room after the diagnosis, the three of us trying to absorb what this meant. "She's going to need care," my father said, his voice shaking. "More and more as it progresses. I don't know if I can handle it alone." Lauren and I looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between us. Then I said, "We'll help." We created a schedule. I took Tuesdays and Thursdays. Lauren took Mondays and Wednesdays. My father handled the rest, with home health aides filling in gaps. We did this not out of obligation or guilt, but because we'd both learned something profound: you can offer care without compromising your boundaries. You can acknowledge someone's humanity without forgetting the harm they caused. Some days were good. Mother would be lucid, grateful, almost like her old self, but softer somehow, the sharp edges of control worn smooth by the disease. We'd sit together and she'd ask about the foundation, really listening this time, or she'd share memories of her own mother that I'd never heard before. Other days were hard. She'd look at Lauren and call her Emily, reaching for a sister who'd been dead for decades. She'd forget my father's name, calling him by her father's name instead. She'd become agitated, convinced she needed to be somewhere important, but unable to remember where or why. About 2 years into her diagnosis, I was visiting on a Tuesday afternoon. Mother had been mostly nonverbal that day, staring out the window with unfocused eyes while I read aloud from a book she'd once loved. I'd learned not to expect much on these visits, had learned to find meaning in simply being present. Then suddenly she turned to me. Her eyes focused with a clarity I hadn't seen in months, sharp and fully present, as if she'd surfaced from deep water. "Nicole," she said, and my name in her mouth sounded different, not the way she'd said it before, loaded with expectations and management, but simple, human, real. "I'm here, Mum." She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You always were the strong one. Not because you were born that way, but because I forced you to be. I needed you to be strong so I could justify giving everything to Lauren. I turned your strength into a punishment." Tears streamed down her face. "And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I held her hand, feeling my own tears start. "I know, Mum. You were my pride too." She continued, the words coming fast now, as if she knew this clarity wouldn't last. "I just never knew how to say it without taking something from Lauren. I thought love was a finite resource, that honouring one daughter meant diminishing the other. I was wrong about everything." She squeezed my hand. "You built something beautiful from what I broke. That foundation, your relationship with Lauren, your life. You took the rubble and made something that matters." "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for seeing that." Her eyes were already losing focus, the moment of clarity fading like morning fog. But she smiled a real smile and said softly, "I see you now. Finally, I see you. 4 months later, my father called early on a Saturday morning. I knew before he spoke what he was going to say. "She's gone," he said quietly, peacefully in her sleep. "I found her this morning. She looked at peace." When we arrived at the house, Lauren and I found my father sitting beside Mother's bed holding her hand. In Mother's other hand was a small printed photograph Lauren had placed with her weeks ago when Mother had asked for something to hold on to. It was the photo of my painting the two sisters in the garden. The funeral was small, simple. Lauren and I stood together at the graveside, our hands clasped, and cried for the complexity of it all. We cried for the woman who'd hurt us while herself being hurt. We cried for the generational pain that had flowed through our family like a river, and for the fact that we'd chosen to dam that river to stop it from flowing forward into the next generation. We cried because she'd been terrible and human and flawed and broken, and our mother, and all of those things could be true at the same time. And in that moment, I realised the story had finally ended. Not with revenge, not with perfect forgiveness, but with the kind of broken, complicated grace that's the only real ending any family story ever has. I found the journals while cleaning out my closet 2 weeks after my mother's funeral. They were in a box I'd shoved on the top shelf when I moved into the bungalow, the kind of box contains things you're not ready to deal with but can't quite throw away. Inside were the spiral notebooks I'd filled during those first weeks in Hawaii, and after, when the betrayal was fresh and my rage was righteous and untempered by any understanding. I sat on my bedroom floor and read through them, my handwriting growing increasingly agitated across the pages. Make them see what they've done. I'd written. Make them pay for every dismissal, every erasure, every lie. Page after page of detailed accounting, every slight, every moment I'd been cropped out of photos or left out of celebrations. Plans for revenge that felt justified at the time. Bitter observations about the family hierarchy that had governed my entire existence. The woman who'd written those words felt both intimately familiar and strangely distant. I understood her rage, honoured it even, but I wasn't her anymore. That evening I built a fire in the small fire pit in my backyard. The air was cool, autumn settling in, and I sat with the journals on my lap watching flames catch and grow. One by one I tore out pages and fed them to the fire. Not out of shame for having felt that anger. It had been necessary, had gotten me moving, when staying still would have killed something essential in me, but because I didn't need to carry it anymore. The anger served its purpose. I said quietly to the flames, to the darkening sky, to whatever part of me was listening. It got me here, but I don't need it to keep me warm anymore. The smoke rose, carrying ash and memory into the evening air, and I felt something lighten in my chest. The invitation came a week later. A regional women's conference wanted me to give a TEDx-style talk on breaking generational cycles of family favoritism. I read the email 3 times, my finger hovering over the delete button. Lauren found me staring at my laptop that evening when she came over for dinner. "What's wrong?" I showed her the invitation. "Are you going to do it?" she asked. "I don't know. Talking about our family to 200 strangers feels terrifying," she supplied. "Yes, but also maybe necessary." She sat beside me. "Your story helped me see what was happening. Maybe it could help other people too." I accepted the next day. Standing on that stage 2 months later, looking out at 200 faces, I felt the old fear rise. What if they judged me? What if they thought I was exaggerating? What if they sided with my mother? But then I remembered I wasn't doing this for their approval. I was doing it for the women who needed permission to speak their own truths. I was erased from my own family story for 36 years. I began my voice stronger than I expected. I was told I was simple but dependable, strong enough not to need support, good enough to carry everyone's burdens, but not valuable enough to be celebrated when I succeeded. I told them about the will, about Mark, about the systematic manipulation that had shaped every aspect of my life. But I also told them about the foundation, about rebuilding with Lauren, about learning that being forgotten by others doesn't mean you have to forget yourself. The greatest victory, I concluded, isn't making people who hurt you suffer. It's refusing to let their cruelty define who you become. The standing ovation surprised me. What surprised me more was the line of women afterwards, 17 of them, each waiting to say, "This is my story too," each one carrying her own version of being the second daughter, the forgotten one, the strong one who didn't need anyone to notice her breaking. I listened to each of them, gave them foundation cards, held their hands when they cried. Forgiveness, it turned out, wasn't about them at all. It was about giving myself permission to stop carrying their baggage and start building my own life. 5 years after the wedding that never happened, I stood in front of 50 women at a second daughter's foundation workshop telling my story, not as confession, but as instruction, not as wound, but as map. The signs of systematic favoritism, I was saying, often start small, a comment here, a dismissal there, but over time they build into a narrative about your worth that becomes harder to question the longer it goes unchallenged. I'd given this workshop dozens of times now, and I knew which parts made women nod in recognition, which parts made them cry, which parts made them lean forward with the desperate hope that someone finally understood. My phone sitting on the podium beside my notes lit up with a text from Lauren. Saturday 2 p.m, small garden wedding, 30 guests. You're my maid of honor, no excuses. I smiled without breaking stride in my presentation. Lauren had been dating Daniel for 2 years, a genuinely kind man who worked as a high school art teacher and treated my sister like someone valuable rather than fragile. Their relationship had been built on honesty from the start, no manipulation, no assigned roles, just two people choosing each other clearly. Saturday came with perfect weather. The garden was intimate, beautiful, without being ostentatious. 30 guests, mostly close friends, and the family members who'd proven themselves capable of genuine relationship. My father was there, older now, but still present, still trying in his limited way to be better than he'd been. Lauren was radiant in a simple dress, her vows handwritten and honest. I spent years being who I thought I should be, she said to Daniel, her voice steady. You're the first person who loved who I actually am. Thank you for waiting while I figured out who that was. When it came time for the bouquet toss, Lauren turned to face the small group of single women gathered behind her. Then she walked directly to me instead, holding out the flowers with a smile that held everything we'd been through and everything we'd become. Your turn, sis, she said. I took the bouquet laughing, not because I was desperate for marriage, but because I understood perfectly what she was saying. I see you. I celebrate you. Your happiness matters as much as mine. During the reception, I noticed Mark standing near the refreshment table, invited as a friend and symbol of the past fully processed. Our eyes met across the garden. He raised his glass in a small acknowledging toast. I nodded back. No words needed. We'd both been pawns in a game neither of us understood at the time, and we'd both found our way to something real. That was enough. That evening, back at my apartment, I thought about the workshop that morning, about Lauren's wedding that afternoon, about the 5 years that had passed since that day I'd been told I couldn't come to my sister's wedding. I thought about the woman I'd been, then hurt, angry, invisible, even to herself, and the woman I'd become seen valued, most importantly self-defined. At the next workshop, I added a closing to my standard talk. 5 years ago, my sister shut me out of her wedding. The stated reason was that her fiancé had feelings for me, but the real reason ran deeper. It was about money and favoritism, and a mother who'd been hurt and passed that hurt down like an inheritance. The day I was banned from that wedding, I felt erased, but being erased gave me the clarity to finally see myself. I lost my family's approval, but I found my own voice. I lost an inheritance, but I built something more valuable, a foundation that helps other women reclaim their worth. I lost a sister who was my rival, but I gained a sister who is my friend. The greatest revenge wasn't making anyone suffer. It was refusing to let their cruelty define my story. It was choosing to write my own ending. So to every second daughter here, you are not invisible. You are not too much or not enough. You are not defined by who overlooked you. You are the author of what comes next. And that is a power no one can steal. The women stood and applauded, and I thought about Lauren handing me that bouquet, about Mark's respectful nod, about my father trying in his imperfect way, about my mother who died still broken, but having at least seen me at the end. I thought about Mrs. Edith saying kindness was fragile, about my grandmother's letter, saying I'd earned recognition through devotion, about every moment that had brought me here. She shut me out of her wedding. But in the end, I was the one who walked away, married to something no one could take from me, my own unshakable sense of worth. And that, I realised, was the only victory that ever mattered. And that's where Nicole's story ends, or perhaps where it truly begins. 5 years after being banned from a wedding that was supposed to celebrate family, she'd built something far more valuable than any invitation could have given her. She'd built a life where she finally saw herself clearly, where her worth wasn't determined by who remembered to include her in the photos, or who thought she deserved a seat at the table. She'd transformed systematic erasure into systematic change, helping hundreds of women reclaim what had been stolen from them. Not just money or property, but something far more precious, the right to be seen, valued, and remembered. Nicole learned that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are. Her family showed her that approval from people who don't truly see you is worthless. They showed her that being strong doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. They showed her that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you needed in order to find what you actually deserve. So, here's my question for you. Have you ever been the invisible one in your family? The dependable one who never got celebrated? The strong one who was never allowed to be weak? Have you ever watched someone else get credit for your work attention, for your achievements, or love that should have been shared equally? If Nicole's story resonated with you, I want to hear your story too. Drop a comment below telling me about a time you felt erased by your own family and how you handled it. And if you want more stories about people who refused to stay invisible, who chose themselves when everyone else chose someone else, hit that subscribe button, because there are so many more stories like Nicole's that deserve to be told. Remember, you're not the supporting character in someone else's story. You're the author of your own. Write it well.